What happens when the twin sons of an NFL legend enter the world of college football together? Marcus and Jalen Knox grew up attached at the hip, wanting to follow in the footsteps of the Knoxes to come before them. Elijah, their father, the original underdog turned Super Bowl champion, now turned his focus to his twin sons. Marcus Knox, the first defender in the family, was not only talented, but people were throwing around words like prodigy and can't miss prospect. Blue blood scouts were blowing up his inbox before he'd even played a snap in senior year. And while Marcus's future seemed secure, his twin brother was a completely different story. Jalen Knox wanted nothing more than to play alongside his brother forever, but there was just one problem. He wasn't very good. Jalen wasn't a naturally gifted athlete and struggled finding where he fit in the most. Receiver, corner, even QB, none of it clicked. Wanting nothing more than to be like his dad, he finally settled on running back. Ahead of senior year, the twins made a pact. Wherever one goes, the other follows. And in their first game of senior year, you couldn't ignore the differences in the two. Marcus came out on fire, 2 monster hits and 2 forced fumbles, looking every bit like the nation's best defender, while Jalen couldn't get the ground game going. He'd run with heart and grit, but all that does you no good if yards don't come too. And after the game, big schools flocked to Marcus, Michigan and Texas to name a few. Scouts would pull Marcus aside, telling him he shouldn't limit himself and promising that they could make him a star. Those words would stick in his head, but he had every intention of making good on his promise to Jalen. While Marcus was basking in the spotlight, doing interviews, talking with scouts one after another, Jalen was only pulling a fraction of the attention. The fact of the matter is, schools just weren't impressed, and his last name alone wasn't enough to carry him. To be honest, most programs that hit him up saw him as nothing more than a ticket to his brother. As senior year raged on, Jalen was still trying to find his own rhythm. He continued to struggle, but bit by bit, flashes of promise started to appear. He was fighting for every yard, refusing to be brought down easy. No one's jaw was dropping yet, but maybe, just maybe, he was more than Marcus's shadow. While Jalen was fighting for his life, Marcus was cold as ice, making game-changing plays nearly every time he touched the field. And even though Jalen would make plays to get the offense in the end zone, it felt almost invisible by comparison. Jalen felt trapped, like he'd never escaped the shadow cast over him. But no one was a bigger fan of him than his brother. Marcus knew the attention he brought, and while he couldn't help it, he would do everything he could to support his brother. He told Jalen to block out the noise, that it was nothing more than a distraction, and that a year from now, the two of them would be making plays together in college like they'd always dreamed. From the sideline, Jalen would watch his brother move like a force of nature. Just like everyone else, he was in awe, feeling equal parts proud and frustrated. Marcus was relentless, playing the position effortlessly, like he just rolled out of bed and stepped on the field like this. Every play reminded Jalen just how far he still had to go. The twins' senior year was flying by, Marcus's offers were blowing up, and even though he politely declined them, he couldn't help but feel like he might be shortchanging his future. The inevitable choice began to weigh on him. With senior night upon him and hat selection just around the corner, time was running out on their high school career. Marcus left it all out on the field, blowing up plays and being a one-man wrecking crew. Then came the one with everything to prove. This was Jalen's last chance to show schools who he was. Over the course of senior year, he had improved and garnered some genuine interest from schools on his own, but it still wasn't enough to match the electrifying force beside him. Now with senior year completely in the books, it was time for the twins to make a decision. Everything was working to pull the twins apart. Marcus's dream to be a premier college defender was being dangled in front of him, but he knew what was more important than any football game he'd ever play. Family. The two made a promise he intended to keep, or at least really wanted to. The two agreed that North Texas was their best shot to take the field together. Jalen could contend for the RB1 role, while Marcus would transform the Mean Green defense into a terrifying unit. Close to home, the twins' future was waiting for them. The morning of hat selection, the entire Knox family piled into the high school gym where reporters swarmed.
Marcus, are you really going to commit to North Texas?
Do you feel like you might be selling yourself short?
Is playing with your brother truly more important than winning a championship?
Marcus gave no answers and just took his seat with Jalen right there beside him. The time had finally come and the country waited with bated breath. While Marcus had offers on the table like Michigan and TCU, he looked over at Jalen and nodded. And as he reached for the mean green hat, Jalen's hand hovered, then went somewhere else completely. The room went dead silent. Jalen Knox just committed to Sam Houston State. He wasn't betraying Marcus, he wasn't breaking their pact out of spite, he just needed to stand on his own, to carve out his own path, to be more than just Elijah's son or the other brother. Marcus took a beat and looked to Jalen. He wasn't mad, he was proud, and now Marcus had his future to choose. There was one program throughout the process that piqued his interest beyond just football. The campus, the culture, the coaches. Marcus was committing to TCU to be a Horned Frog. Cameras flashed and questions flooded the gymnasium as the twins just smiled. And now they were stepping into the unknown, finally on separate paths. Marcus hit campus at TCU with all eyes on him, and in his first practice, the speed of Division I backs caught him by surprise early. In high school, he was always always hunting the big hits, but here that wasn't cutting it. He had to go back to basics, wrap up, finish through, and do things the right way. And when he did, old Marcus started to show. Marcus began his freshman year at a 74 overall, looking like the nation's next defensive prodigy. But talent only exists on paper. What really mattered is how he'd look on the field. In his first game against North Carolina, Marcus was met with a harsh reality. College football was an entirely different game. Coach threw him out there in pass coverage, which Marcus would be the first to tell you wasn't his forte. And on the few times he did get to rush, he just wasn't quick enough. It wasn't quite the college debut that Marcus had pictured. In week 2, things did improve. Marcus was playing to his strengths and flying downhill. TCU wins in dominating fashion and showed no signs of slowing down against Old Dominion. Remember what I said about him struggling in pass coverage? Well, late in the 4th, he showed his mind for the game, reading the quarterback perfectly, jumping the route for his first college interception. He didn't quite have the speed to take it back, but hey, we'll work on that. The Horned Frogs continued to shine, and Marcus Knox was beginning to garner the attention of the local sorority. But he was too locked in to party. Maybe next time. And by week 9, the coaches were ready to move Marcus up to linebacker 1. That is, if he could win the job. He did. In his first outing as the 1, Marcus elevated his game to a whole new level. As the 1, coach wasn't having him sit back in coverage. He was coming downhill, punishing the ball carrier. 4th and goal against UCF, Marcus sniffed out the run before the ball was even snapped. He dove into the backfield, wrapping up the back for a goal line stand. Surely with the defense moving like this, the offense would put up some points, right? Right? Despite the loss, Marcus's performance had local brands leaping at the chance to attach themselves to him and the Knox name, and he'd also win his first ever Defensive Player of the Week. TCU had a gem on their hands, but down in Huntsville, things weren't as glamorous. Marcus's twin brother Jalen was beginning his freshman year at just a 68 overall and currently RB3 on the depth chart at Sam Houston. He wasn't seeing the field in any meaningful way, so practice was where he had to win over the coaches. He wasn't exactly wowing anyone, but for the first time in his football career, he didn't have the weight of his brother suffocating him, having only himself to compete with, along with the 2 other running backs ahead of him, of course. The first few weeks of the season were pretty quiet for Jalen, spending most of it on the bench, occasionally getting subbed in for blocking assignments. But Jalen wasn't discouraged. He knew what he signed up for, and to him, practices were his game day. He was confident that sooner or later his effort would catch the eyes of the coaches. As the season progressed, Jalen's life was nowhere near as glamorous as his brother's, but all the late night phone calls with Marcus helped him to keep his head on straight. His brother told him to be patient and that his time would come. And after weeks of standing on the sidelines being the team's water boy, coaches were finally taking notice of his dedication. And sure enough, against Tulsa, Jalen was being called out there. And even better, he was getting an actual handoff. Okay, he didn't really go anywhere, but his 4 yards were enough to contribute to a thrilling 7-0 victory. Jalen was riding high after seeing his first meaningful game action. He even started curving some of the Huntsville Huzz. Wait a minute, does this girl have a twin that goes to TCU? Against Kennesaw State, Jalen started getting sprinkled in even more. And while his dad was a threat out of the backfield in the receiving game, Jalen wasn't exactly as gifted, but he was serviceable. He was feeling pretty good, and maybe coach would even consider moving him up the depth chart after this game. But then he saw the RB1 start ripping off runs like this. When Jalen got his chance as a rusher, it was pretty uninspiring. Though towards the end of the game, he did string together 2 pretty solid runs to help seal the victory. Jalen was far from being RB1, and he certainly wasn't making waves in college football like his brother. Marcus's freshman year had been one for the history books. Every week he seemed to only get better, and a matchup against the Baylor Bears would be a pretty good measuring stick. TCU's defense was stout, and Marcus was a one-man wall, not letting anything by. Late in the 3rd quarter, Baylor was knocking on the door, and Marcus was knocking on them, popping the ball loose and recovered by the Horned Frogs. A massive play that would seal TCU their 6th win of the season and cement Marcus as a certified rising star. And then another big test. Against number 22 ranked Utah, Marcus would get fooled early, a read option that would leave him in the backfield and the Utes downfield. A rare miss from the otherwise dominant freshman, and Utah seemed to have the right game plan. Stay far away from 44. So Marcus locked in, and suddenly he was everywhere all at once, blowing up plays left and right. Then late in the 4th quarter, he'd come through with a touchdown saving tackle and leading the Horned Frogs to their biggest upset of the season. And now Marcus Knox was officially a household name. Coach even rewarded him with a halfback 2 position battle. Oh, wait a minute, that must be Jalen. Turns out coaches liked what they saw from him and wanted to see what they really had in Jalen Knox. And suffice it to say, Jalen took the opportunity and ran with it. He still had plenty of room to grow, but he managed to sneak out the win and make his first move up the depth chart. He was over the moon, ready to take the field and finally see some meaningful reps. And Marcus assured him he'd be tuned in, ready to see his brother in action. But in his next game, instead of opportunity, all he was given was a front row seat to the RB1 looking irreplaceable. How could he ever hope to beat out this guy? Against Delaware, things weren't any different. The season was coming to a close and Jalen hadn't seen the field but a handful of times. Had he wasted his whole freshman— Wait a minute, that's a fumble! That may have just been the ticket to more playtime. Sure enough, after that fumble and yet another loss, coaches say, what the hell, Jalen, here's your shot. Now he wasn't the greatest talent out there, he wasn't hurdling over defenders or juking anyone out of their shoes, but coach coaches saw a motor that never quit. And when all was said and done, Jalen had finally earned himself the RB1 role that he had been chasing. At 4-7, the Bearcats weren't really playing for anything, but for Jalen, it may as well have been the Super Bowl. A good outing today could solidify his RB1 role for sophomore year. He takes the field, and on his first carry, it's an easy 9 yards. And on his second, another chunk gain. Wait a minute, where has this Jalen been? He was hitting holes with confidence, running like a man with something to prove. He was actually kind of good. But of course, it wasn't smooth sailing forever. UTEP started clamping down, and the running lanes were shrinking. And while Jalen didn't quite have his father's breakaway speed, he ran pissed off, lowering his shoulder and hunting for contact on every carry. But in the fourth quarter, disaster would strike. Jalen gets met hard at the goal line and the ball pops loose. And for a moment, his heart was in his throat. Not ideal in your debut as the starter, but Jalen wasn't folding. His response? His first collegiate touchdown. The night had overall been a success, but Jalen wasn't ready to step off the field just yet. And this run would introduce Jalen Knox to the world. He picks up the first down, but he wasn't finished, charging forward and leaving not one, but 2 bodies on the turf. Move over Derrick Henry. Okay, maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves, but still. The Bearcats would ultimately lose, but Jalen walked off the field making sure his name was known. And that chatter traveled fast. Up in Fort Worth, students were asking Marcus, "Dude, isn't that your brother?" Marcus, proud as ever, was looking to close out his season too, laying dudes out in Kansas left and right, making every ball carrier regret suiting up that day. And despite a heartbreaking overtime loss, Marcus would conclude his season with freshman All-Big 12 honors and a bowl game date against Texas A&M. And with Jalen's season finished, the entire Knox family packed in to watch Marcus under the lights. Right from kickoff, Marcus was moving differently. He was shooting gaps, single-handedly wrecking plays, and making the Aggies question their life choices. And for some reason, they kept running at him. It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them. But despite his dominance, TCU just couldn't pull out the win. A tough way to end it, but Marcus walked off the field knowing that he had leveled up. And with that, freshman year was officially wrapped, and decisions now lie in front of both twins. For Jalen, the transfer portal didn't yield much, and he was fine with that. And a full year as the RB1 with the Bearcats was just what he wanted. But for Marcus, bigger programs were foaming at the mouth for him. And while TCU was good to him, Marcus, like every Knox to come before him, wanted championships. 2 brothers, 2 paths. And with freshman year officially down, the real Knox twin story starts now. Marcus knew the truth, even though he didn't want to say it out loud. He was too good for the Big 12. He wanted a bigger stage, tougher competition, and most of all, a championship. And that's when he got a call, a program that promised him everything he thought he was ready for. So Marcus packed his bags and headed to Tuscaloosa to join the Crimson Tide. Marcus entered his sophomore year rated an 83 overall, fully convinced he was the missing piece for Alabama. And honestly, if you watched his first practice, it was hard to argue. Analysts were already circling Bama as early national title favorites. The roster was loaded and the expectations were sky high. And now week 1 had arrived. As Marcus took the field, something surprised even him. There were no nerves, no jitters. He was just ready to get to work. But that calm feeling didn't last long. Early in the game, Marcus could feel the stakes were different. West Virginia was supposed to be a warm-up. Instead, on the very first drive, the Mountaineers completed a pass over the middle, slip a tackle, and they were gone for a long touchdown. But Marcus jogs off the field shrugging it off, telling himself it was fine, just a lucky break. Then on the next series, he gets his chance to rush the QB, except he gets put in the dirt by the guard. Marcus pops right up and tells himself he slipped, so no big deal, right? But the cracks were already beginning to show. West Virginia starts picking on the secondary, chunk play after chunk play, and even Marcus, the guy brought in to change everything, was struggling to make an impact. And that's when it got real ugly. The Mountaineer QB pulls it on a read option, and Marcus steps up for the tackle, only to be completely rolled over on a touchdown run. Just 2 quarters into his sophomore year, and his confidence, his ego were taking a beating. Bama finally scores, and Marcus takes the field hunting redemption. There was no way that was going to be the play everyone remembered. He comes flying downhill, lines up the hit, and bounces right off. What was happening? For the first time in his life, Marcus felt out of place. At TCU, he was the man, signing autographs and taking pictures after games. But here, he was just another name on a locker. And when the boos started raining down, he felt unworthy of the name on his jersey. On the sideline, he quietly prayed to himself. Just give him one good play, one hit to turn things around. And in the third quarter, he got it. West Virginia dialed up a short pass that Marcus read like a book. He blasted the receiver, knocking the ball loose, and Bama takes the lead on a scoop and score. And finally, a sigh of relief for Marcus. But turns out that play wasn't a spark, only a flicker. Marcus fell right back into old habits, chasing highlight hits, trying to force his way back into the crowd's good graces. For Marcus, the game was a nightmare start to finish, and by the final whistle, Alabama was on the wrong side of a season-opening upset. Marcus hung his head all the way to the locker room, and for the first time ever, the thought crept in. Maybe he wasn't the greatest Knox after all. But there really wasn't time to sulk. After a quick pep talk from the family, Marcus was ready to reset. But if West Virginia was a challenge, number 9 ranked Clemson might just just be impossible. Marcus would be lying if he said he wasn't nervous going into this one. As a matter of fact, it was the first time he'd ever really felt nerves before kickoff. He opened the game timing the run perfectly, beating the block and dropping the back for a short gain. Then right after, he reads the back perfectly, blowing him up for an early TFL. The crowd roared, coaches slapped him on his helmet, and Marcus took a sigh of relief. He wasn't single-handedly altering the game like his TCU self, but he was settling in as the guy Bama brought him in to be. His pass coverage skills were still shoddy, but when he came downhill, the quarterback was definitely feeling it, getting in the backfield for his first multi-sack game of his college career. Despite Marcus's bounce back, the defense still had one glaring issue. The corners couldn't guard a statue. The game slipped into overtime where Marcus was trying to end it himself, flying through for his third sack of the night. But in the end, his efforts just weren't enough to change the outcome. Clemson comes through with a narrow victory, and after the game, Alabama coach Dabo Swinney, by the way, finds Marcus and tells him the staff has been thrilled with his performance. Encouraging, but kind of weird behavior after starting 0-2 if you ask me. Just 2 games in, and Alabama's playoff hopes were already on life support. But an upset against number 2 ranked Ohio State could catapult them back into relevancy. But instead, it exposed everything. Bama's defense was holding their own. Well, everyone except the secondary. Ohio State takes the lead right before halftime, and in the third quarter, Marcus fights his way to the QB for a sack to hold the Buckeyes to 3. But the secondary kept fumbling, and now the offense was too. From there, the pressure mounted, and what started as a competitive game unraveled into an embarrassing loss. Afterwards, it seemed like the narrative shifted overnight. What started as early natty buzz turned into what the hell is going on in Tuscaloosa. When reporters went looking for someone to blame, Marcus stepped in front of the noise and owned everything. Every loss, every miscue, even the ones that weren't his. For Marcus, all of this was new. He had never faced real adversity before, and when he needed perspective, he turned to the one person he knew that had. He could only hope his brother Jalen's season was off to a better start than his. Meanwhile, in Huntsville, Jalen was stepping into his first season as a true RB1. Coming in at just a 74 overall, his game was nowhere near complete, but he had high hopes that sophomore year could really shape him. Jalen's season was beginning with a matchup against UL Monroe, which my TikTok OGs will remember is where his dad's journey started. Speaking of his dad, if there was one thing Jalen learned last year, it's that he wasn't his father. He wasn't a small scatback with blazing speed, he was, well, Jalen. So he ditched dad's old number and for the first time ever leaned fully into what he really was, a bruiser. In his sophomore debut, Jalen was unrecognizable. The offseason work he put in with Marcus and their dad was showing. And sure, sometimes it still looked like he was running in a dream, but once he picked up steam, he wasn't going down easy. Before long, Jalen had eclipsed 100 yards on the ground, but was still hunting for more. And that's when he slipped through defenders and outran the secondary on his way to the end zone. Jalen was single-handedly elevating the Bearcat offense. He felt like there wasn't anything he couldn't do. Okay, maybe except hurdle. Sam Houston crushed UL Monroe, and for the first time ever, Jalen genuinely felt worthy of the name on his back. After a monster sophomore debut, Jalen was riding high and searching for a repeat performance in week 2. Colorado State wasn't giving up the same home run plays, but that was fine. Jalen was built for long grinding games like this. While the Ram defense was getting gas, Jalen was finding energy with every hit. The once stiff defense was breaking down, and Jalen was finding more and more with every play. Down by 4 with a minute to go, the Bearcats were content to ride the hot hand all the way down the field. On 2nd and goal with under a minute left, Jalen would punch in the go-ahead score to cap off another wild performance. Bearcats moved to 2-0 as Jalen was quickly climbing the national rushing charts. But after a monster start to his season, he couldn't help but feel bad seeing Marcus so down. And when the two caught up, Jalen downplayed his success, saying it was nowhere near the competition that Marcus was up against. But Marcus was proud to see his brother shining and encouraged him to enjoy every minute of it. Jalen was feeling on top of the world until he traveled to Fort Worth. TCU hadn't forgotten about Marcus's transfer, and they made sure Jalen paid for it, with extra attention, late hits, and stuffing the run. The Horned Frogs were making Jalen's life miserable, so coach got creative trying to scheme up ways to get their playmaker the ball, and by pure willpower, Jalen got them into the end zone. But it was only downhill from there. Once TCU figured out Jalen was the entire offense, it was pretty easy to shut him down. The Bearcats got tossed around just like everyone expected them to, leading to their first loss of the season. After the game, Marcus hit up his brother to apologize for the beating he took in his name. Jalen playfully responded with, "Maybe if you hadn't transferred, I'd have gotten the chance to run you over." The two laughed about how close they'd been to facing off, but then the laughter slowed and the thought hung in the air. Jalen versus Marcus. How would that go? Jalen knew he still had a long way to go before even thinking he could be on Marcus's level. And while he was currently making waves in college football, or at least waves in Conference USA, the talking heads on College Game Day had their doubts. He's just padding stats against bottom-feeding programs, they said. Well, if there was ever a chance to shut them up, it would be against Boise State. And early early on, you could say that the Bearcat offensive line was doing all of the heavy lifting, and Jalen would even agree with you. Fast forward to the fourth quarter, Sam Houston down 4, Jalen was able to dive over the top of the goal line to give the Bearcats the lead. From there, the defense finishes the job, and Jalen prints out another great performance. And after that win, it was pretty hard not to know the name Jalen Knox. Quickly becoming the nation's worst kept secret, he even made an appearance on the Pat McAfee show. All of the glitz and glamour of being a campus celebrity was cool, but Jalen was just focused on getting back on the field. And ahead of the next outing, coach hit him up to warn him that things were gonna get pretty wet. And early on, yeah, it looked like the rain might be Jalen's kryptonite. But once he found his footing, the floodgates swung open. Just a year ago at Sam Houston, a rainy game like this would have the stadium completely empty. But Jalen's newfound status would have the student section filled. And he'd been a workhorse all year long, but in this one, it was taken to a whole new level. Throwing the ball was completely out of the question, mostly because the Bearcats quarterback was pretty awful. And that left Jalen with a whopping 34 carries by game's end. Yeah, maybe the Bearcats need to find some other way to move the ball. But for Jalen, there was no time for a victory lap, and before the soreness could set in, he sprinted back to his dorm to catch kickoff for Texas at Alabama, hoping to see Marcus finally notch that first win. Marcus and Bama were in rare territory, 0-3, and while Marcus's play had improved over the last few weeks, none of it mattered if he couldn't do enough to help his team win. Number 8 ranked Texas came to play, but the Crimson Tide defense was looking stout for the first time all year. The problem was, the offense couldn't do anything. While the frustration started to boil over on the sideline, Marcus kept the defense locked in, telling his guys it was up to them to give the offense every chance to flip this thing. Then before halftime, Marcus came crashing through the line on a third down, burying the back for a loss. With great field position, Bama finally gets on the board, and Marcus kept hunting, flying through for a sack. After halftime, the offense finally woke up, and the defense kept the pressure on all the way to a 24-18 victory. A much needed win for the Tide. When the media wanted to know how this 0-3 team just pulled off a historic upset, Marcus made sure to spread the praise around. And while the locker room was celebrating finally being in the win column, Marcus had his eyes set on Texas A&M in what would be his most dominant performance to date, starting with folding this massive tight end like laundry. And that was just the warm-up, immediately after getting into his pass rush bag and getting home for a sack, knocking the ball out in the process. And for the rest of the game, Marcus set up camp in the backfield, just absolutely demolishing the running back. Marcus was quickly turning into the every down problem Bama had brought him in to be, and he was even showing some growth in pass coverage, nearly snagging this pick. But hey, we'll blame the rain for that one. Alabama scraped out the win, though the offense only scoring 10 points wasn't exactly title contender behavior. And after starting the season 0-3, Bama had stacked together 3 straight wins to bring them back to 500. And with Marcus's draft stock beginning to rise, his DMs were getting a lot more active. Sorry Madison, maybe next time. But ahead of week 7, coach would come bearing some bad news. A tragic scooter injury, I guess, would leave the Tide without a starter on the line. But Marcus made sure that didn't slow down the defense. In fact, they'd put together a dominant performance, holding the Wildcats to only 9 points for the entire game, which should have been enough, but Bama's offense once again made sure to fumble the bag. At this point, Marcus knew the season wasn't about winning at all anymore. It was about him and his growth, and week by week, he was leveling up, and man, he's so close to getting that pick. But let's be real, this team wasn't ready for a real run yet. The offense was hot and cold, and the secondary was still the weakest unit on the team. Still, every now and then, everything would click, and when that happened, with Marcus playing the best football of his life, they could steamroll literally anyone. And with only a few weeks left in the season, Marcus couldn't help but think ahead to junior year. Did he really want to hit the portal again? After all, Bama hadn't quite worked out the way he had hoped. But one thing was for certain, if he was going to stay, over the next few weeks, he needed to see one thing: offense. Against Arkansas, the Razorbacks' game plan was to erase number 44. It didn't work. Marcus was beating every block thrown at him and blowing up every run, forcing Arkansas to throw out half their playbook. By the third quarter, Bama's offense had scraped together 16 points. Not exactly dominant, but it was something. Marcus wasn't taking any chances. He was staying aggressive. With the Razorbacks on the 1-yard line, Marcus was playing off pure instinct, knifing into the backfield right off the snap for a huge tackle for loss. The game ended up getting way too close for comfort. A reminder that this team might not be ready to take the next step. But Marcus was just happy to see his offense put some points on the board. By this point in the season, Marcus wasn't just playing well, he was a legitimate problem in the SEC. Every offensive coordinator was losing sleep trying to figure out how to slow him down. The following week against number 5 ranked Ole Miss, their answer was apparently to just pray and hope for the best. Marcus opened the game by detonating a run play, a monster tackle for loss, forcing a fumble that the defense jumped on. Alabama turned it into 7, and Marcus never took his foot off the gas. To open the second half, he delivered what might be his most earth-shattering hit of the season, blowing blowing through the line and imposing his will yet again. The Tide rode the wave all the way to a 27-14 upset. Yeah, Bama wasn't making the playoffs, but they were going to make sure you didn't either. The final week of the season had arrived, and somehow, after everything, Alabama had clawed their way back into the top 20. But Marcus wasn't satisfied. Against number 4 ranked Auburn, he took out every ounce of frustration on any back unlucky enough to carry the ball on his field. Bama was looking to end the season with one more massive upset, and Marcus was sure doing his part, flying down the line at the quarterback for a sack on 3rd down. And then, clinging to a 1-point lead, Auburn dialed up a stretch run not at Marcus but away from him. 90 yards later and the season was over. Alright, fine, Auburn, you can go to the playoffs. That loss slammed the door on Alabama's year, the team falling hopelessly short of the country's expectations. Individually though, Marcus cleaned up, winning just about every defensive award out there. There were even whispers that if he stayed on this trajectory, a future Heisman nod wasn't out of the question. Marcus's stock was rising, while his faith in the program wasn't. Alabama earned themselves a pity bowl game against Boston College, and Marcus treated it exactly how it felt. He was insulted by the matchup, and the challenge quite frankly bored him. He spent the afternoon proving the Eagles were nowhere near his level. When his sophomore year officially closed, Marcus had plenty to think about. But for now, his attention shifted to his brother, who was trying to finish his year the same way it started, with a bang. Jalen's rise at Sam Houston wasn't on anyone's bingo card, and everyone was sort of waiting for him to cool off, but he wasn't. FIU would only be his next victim, opening the game with a 68-yard touchdown run right out of the gate. Someone get my man some oxygen. Jalen was already on his way to another monster day when he decided that just being productive wasn't enough for him anymore. Late in the 3rd quarter, he told coach, "I want to be able to do more than just take handoffs. Line me up out wide." And who was coach to argue? From the slot, Jalen snagged a pass over the middle, shoved a helpless FIU defender to the turf, and took it 93 yards to the house. The Bearcats won, and Jalen finally got his moment in the national spotlight, earning his first National Player of the Week honor. After the game, Marcus hit him up, throwing some loving brotherly trash talk his way. "It's a cute award you got there, Jalen." "Yeah, whatever, Marcus. Talk to me when your team can score a touchdown." As sophomore year wound down, it felt like Jalen was only scratching the surface, and that's when the toll of the workload started to catch up to him. The lanes became tighter, the earlier season explosives disappeared, and defenses started to figure him out. Before long, Sam Houston's Cinderella run had collapsed into a 3-game losing streak. But even so, by season's end, Jalen had done more than enough to earn some accolades of his own, and drag Sam Houston to a bowl game against San Diego State. As he took the field for the final game of the year, he felt torn. Sam Houston had become a home, but was it really his ceiling? Was he ready to take the next step? Well, he wasn't sure, but a strong bowl game could only help his transfer portal stock. Early on, Jalen was carving up the Aztecs, but as the game progressed, his lack of burst was obvious. But he wasn't deterred. Jalen kept grinding, punching in 2 total touchdowns from the goal line, leading Sam Houston to a razor-thin 1-point victory. And that was all she wrote for sophomore year. When the twins finally caught up, they discussed the road ahead. The longer they talked, the more the picture became clear. Marcus was on a team that couldn't keep up, and Jalen felt like he might have outgrown his. But neither of them planned to stay stuck forever. One thing was for certain: junior year was going to change everything. It felt like both twins were drifting towards the transfer portal, but this wasn't a decision you could rush. When the two finally caught up, Jalen asked Marcus where his head was at, and honestly, Marcus didn't have a clear answer yet. He just knew he needed some guidance. Wait a minute, who's calling? It's Elijah Knox, their father, calling to share a story. When Elijah took the Texans to the Super Bowl and lost, everyone around him said the same thing: demand a trade and get out of Houston. Go somewhere easier. But that didn't sit right with him, so he chose to stay, and the next year they finished the job. This wasn't any different. Marcus didn't go to Alabama to feel comfortable, he went there to hoist a trophy, and walking away now wouldn't fix what was unfinished. The truth was, the back half of sophomore year proved something pretty important. Marcus still had more to give to this team, and if he could string together a full season playing at that level, there was no telling how far this thing could go. So for junior year, Marcus was staying put, which left Jalen. Going back to Sam Houston and chasing a Conference USA title crossed his mind, but that's not it. Marcus floated the idea of finally teaming up at Alabama, the plan they once dreamed about, but that didn't feel right either. And then he found it. A team desperate for difference makers, playing in a division that would eat you alive if you let it. Exactly the kind of fight Jalen wanted. He was off to Vanderbilt. The Commodores sat at the bottom of the SEC food chain, and everyone knew it. Jalen wasn't brought in to be a savior, but simply to raise the floor. He entered junior year rated a 76 overall and still trying to prove he belonged at this level. After his first practice, coach shot a message out to the team: the season schedule is now live. And Jalen was eager, scrolling through the matchups. SMU, South Carolina, Mizzou, LSU. Then he froze. Alabama. Week 7. He'd be going toe-to-toe with his twin brother. His stomach flipped and he wasn't sure why. Was he nervous? Excited? Scared even? Probably all of it. But none of that mattered right now. After all, his role as RB1 wasn't guaranteed guaranteed to last. It was his job to make coach never want to take him off the field, starting in week 1 against NC State. When Jalen took the field, he was overwhelmed at the magnitude of it all. For as long as he could remember, he'd just been waiting for the game to tell him to hang up the cleats, that it was over. But here he was, playing in the SEC. Jalen lines up in the backfield for the first time as a Commodore, and on his first handoff, the line parted like the Red Sea, and he didn't hesitate, hitting the hole, and 34 yards later, he's finally chased down. Just like that, a statement was made. But his junior debut wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. NC State adjusted fast, and the hits were coming faster and harder than he'd ever felt before. No point in sugarcoating it, Vanderbilt was getting dog-walked. But late in the third quarter, Jalen would finally find a crease again with nothing but green in front of him. He lowered his shoulder at the goal line, and honestly, I'm not really sure what happened here. Vandy would lose their season opener, and Jalen, well, he was feeling every bit of it. The loss, the hits, and most of all, the wake-up call. If he was going to survive in the SEC, he needed to tap into a level he'd never reached before. After the game, Jalen figured it was time to address the elephant in the room. Speaking of elephants in the room, Marcus, freshly committed to Alabama, locked in on a national title run, didn't even realize what Jalen was talking about when he mentioned the schedule. Oh, right, week 7. That'll be interesting, huh? Are you ready? The two had only ever lined up against each other in practice as kids and in backyard drills, but in a real game, all bets were off. For Marcus, sophomore year came with plenty of growing pains, but by the end of it, he'd found his stride. Coming in at a 90 overall, junior year wasn't about proving he belonged, it was about pushing his ceiling. And what better way to start than with a heavyweight matchup against number 7 ranked Michigan. Alabama was gifted a top 25 ranking to open the year, but Marcus knew more than anyone, rankings didn't mean much. Michigan came out in empty sets early, forcing Marcus to line up out on an island. A clever tactic to get him out of the way, and Marcus was just relieved he wasn't actually being asked to play corner. But that adjustment didn't last long. The rest of the Bama defense stepped up, forcing Michigan to change up the approach, and once they did, Marcus was free to fly downhill and play his game. Yeah, Marcus was going to be a problem this year. At one point, he fought through 3 blockers on a rush to the quarterback. No, seriously, count them. 2 quarters in, Alabama's defense was pitching a shutout, and by the 3rd quarter, Michigan's running back had managed just 5 yards on 10 carries. Most of that thanks to Marcus. Late in the 4th, tied at 14, under 2 minutes left, Marcus was smelling blood. Wolverines backed up on their own 1-yard line, Marcus shot through the gap and overshoots this easy tackle just a smidge, but does just enough to contribute to a safety. Alabama hangs on and escapes with an ugly win, but hey, 1-0 is 1-0. To Marcus, this year felt different. He felt unstoppable, finally fully connected with his coaches and teammates, and the energy inside the locker room was higher than it had ever been. There was a genuine belief there now, one that hadn't existed before. So when Ohio State came to town, nobody flinched. This was the same team that had embarrassed Alabama just a year ago, and for Marcus, this wasn't just another early season matchup, this one was personal. And call him Anakin, because his powers had doubled since the last time they met. Marcus hunted all night long, while the offense took full advantage of every stop he and the defense created. By the 4th quarter, the Tide were up 2 scores, and Marcus was out there sending people to the hospital. Alabama gets their revenge, moves to 2-0, and Marcus made one thing very clear. This year, he was on a mission, and nothing and no one was going to slow him down. I mean, this FCS team would try, but yeah, let's just move on. After starting the season 3-0, Marcus was once again college football's golden boy, and Alabama found itself right back in the national title bubble. And while Marcus was soaking it all in, going to pool parties at the coach's house, up in Nashville, Jalen was stewing. Marcus didn't seem all that concerned about their upcoming matchup, and that didn't sit right with him. Did he really think it was going to be a walk in the park? Because for Jalen, it's been all he could think about. Every spare moment was spent either in the weight room or the film room. There certainly was no time for pool parties. Jalen treated every game like Marcus was on the other side of the field, and while this FCS opponent wasn't exactly Marcus level competition, he still wasn't taking it easy. And sure, the defense looked like a middle school unit out there, but to Jalen, racking up numbers like this still mattered. And no, there wasn't a soul in the country who believed Vanderbilt could actually topple Alabama, but quietly, Vandy's offense was putting on a clinic. Even when the ball wasn't in Jalen's hands, the Commodores looked sharp. Then in the 3rd quarter, Jalen went nuclear. He spun out of a tackle, turned his eyes upfield, brushed off another defender, and suddenly he was gone, 54 yards to the house. And he wasn't finished there. With the game all but over, Jalen insisted on staying out there, wanting every possible snap. With one more handoff, he found a crease up the middle and went untouched for 74 yards and another touchdown. 350 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 1 school record later, Vanderbilt knew they had their guy. For the first time this year, Jalen was getting national attention, and if he was being honest, it felt good knowing Marcus was definitely seeing it. But truth be told, a week 2 win over an FCS cupcake squad wasn't exactly something to hang your hat on. The coaches were thrilled, but Jalen needed more. He wanted something that could actually test him, and that test arrived quickly in the form of number 15 ranked SMU. Despite everything he had done at Sam Houston, and even in his early dominance at Vanderbilt, analysts still couldn't say Jalen's name without mentioning Marcus in the same breath. and he hated that. Early on, Vanderbilt moved the ball well, but it didn't last. SMU adjusted, tightened up, and Jalen's daylight started disappearing fast. Then his quarterback threw a pick and the Mustangs cashed it in, and suddenly the Commodores were chasing. From there, things unraveled. Vanderbilt's O-line was Vanderbroken, and Jalen was getting swallowed up nearly every time he touched the ball. But resilience was his calling card. On 3rd and 11, he leaked out of the backfield, found a soft spot in the coverage, and raced towards it. The quarterback hit him in stride, and Jalen dragged the offense down to the 5-yard line. He had given them life, the spark they needed to finally reach the end zone. Coming out of the half, Vanderbilt was still in it, and Jalen made sure they stayed that way. He kept his foot on the gas, ripped off another big run, and even threw in a rare juke. And if he were as fast as he is strong, this one might have gone the distance. Fast forward to the 4th quarter, down 7, under a minute left, staring at another 3rd and long, everyone in the huddle knew this was it. Jalen worked his magic again, slipping up the seam, doing just enough to move the chains. One strike from the quarterback tied the game, and suddenly Vanderbilt had the ball again with 20 seconds and some hope. One more clutch play from Jalen pushed the offense into field goal range, and one kick later, against all odds, Vanderbilt had pulled off the upset. Jalen may not have found the end zone in this one, but make no mistake, he was the heartbeat of this win. Even the media had no choice but to give him his flowers. After the game, Jalen sent a couple of his highlights to Marcus, a quiet warning of things to come. Marcus was amused, but not exactly impressed, and in just a few short weeks, the two would be face to face. The Knox Bowl was approaching fast, and Jalen was stuck between preparing for Marcus and simply surviving the SEC, and South Carolina would deliver a harsh reality check. Vanderbilt struggled badly. Their shiny new running back couldn't find any space, and the line wasn't doing him any favors either. Credit where it's due though, the coaching staff got creative, splitting Jalen out wide and scheming ways to get him touches. But still, the Gamecocks exposed every flaw in the Commodores, and there were many. Jalen took a beating, and Vanderbilt came up empty. In the locker room, Jalen sat with his head down, going over the game in his head. Just when it felt like he was breaking through, he was knocked right back down. As he packed up his gear, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus. "You'll have to do better than that in week 7. Jalen left him unread, but yeah, he knew Marcus was right. And while Jalen was still finding his footing in the SEC, his brother hadn't skipped a beat. Alabama was 3-0, boasting the nation's most terrifying defense, and 12th ranked Oklahoma State didn't feel all that threatening to Marcus. With every passing week, he found new ways to terrorize offenses, crashing through the line for safeties or dropping into coverage and hitting like prime Brian Dawkins. Ranked opponents fell one by one like it was nothing, and at the center of it all stood Marcus Knox. Following the win, Alabama secured a new top 10 ranking and were looking unstoppable. And if number 8 ranked Oklahoma couldn't slow them down, there truly was no hope for the rest of the nation. Marcus started the day slow, which was rare, but unlike last year, the defense didn't completely collapse without him. A pick 6 gave Alabama an early lead, but truth be told, Marcus hates watching other people make plays, so he locked in, and as soon as the Sooners were driving before the half, Marcus was finally making his mark on the game. But despite him making plays right before halftime, Oklahoma finally sneaked one over Marcus's head and tied it up. Coming out of the half, if you've ever seen that photo of the gamer sitting up in his chair, that was basically Marcus. Then came probably the play of the season. Marcus comes through with the rush, the QB rolls off one sack, turns and launches a bomb down the field all the way down to the 2-yard line. But with their backs against the wall, Alabama forced a fumble at the goal line. And with 2 minutes to play, Bama clinging to their 7-point lead, Oklahoma was driving. The Tide defense looked gassed, but once the Sooners reached the red zone, Marcus decided enough is enough. Sitting in coverage, he read the quarterback's eyes and stepped in front of the throw for his first interception since freshman year. A pick that saved the game. We won't talk about how the game still slipped into overtime and got really scary, just that Alabama hung on and improved to 5-0. And after staying undefeated, the same reporter who clowned Marcus and Bama's losing streak last year was back again singing nothing but praise. By this point in the season, Marcus was operating on another plane of existence. His highlights looped everywhere, all over the nation, and when they reached Jalen, they unsettled him. He'd never feared his brother, but now he was seeing what the rest of the country saw. A monster. With only 2 weeks before the showdown, every single snap mattered. He knew going up against Marcus would be the toughest challenge of his life, and now was no time for setbacks. Mizzou was tough, one of the toughest teams Vandy had faced all year. In the rain, on the road, but Jalen wasn't letting that slow him down. The Tigers were getting stiff, and right before the half, Vanderbilt was still trying to get on the board. Desperate for a spark, Jalen took the handoff, weaved through traffic before bouncing it outside, and this is normally where Jalen would get tracked down, but with one Tiger to beat, he hit a gear he'd never found before, and he was gone, all the way for 6. And coming out of the break, he said, "Want to see me do it again?" Racing past some more beautiful blocks, and it's yet another foot race to the end zone, this time diving across the goal line for his second long touchdown of the day. By the end of it, Jalen had flat out dragged Vanderbilt to the win. While the team celebrated, Jalen stayed locked in. Even when his first NIL deal came calling, he barely reacted. And part of him even thought they'd called up the wrong Knox by mistake. Earning something on his own still didn't feel right. And next up for the Commodores, a matchup that Jalen might have overlooked. LSU. He had been so focused on week 7 and his matchup against Marcus that he had almost forgotten about the Tigers. His head was already in next week, and it showed. Jalen was sluggish, sluggish, his vision was non-existent, and the number 12 ranked Tigers and the home crowd in Death Valley were making it impossible to do anything. The Commodores had no choice but to spread the ball around, and even were able to approach the goal line, where Jalen found a rare crease, slipped through defenders, and dove into the end zone. Right then, Jalen snapped back into the moment. Alright, maybe he could salvage this week after all. The Vanderbilt defense stifles the Tigers, coming through with a stop and giving Jalen and the offense another chance to make something happen. Jalen began to find his footing, and the OC was getting into his bag. Options, route combinations out of the backfield, and just when it looked like the Commodores were about to find pay dirt again, the Tigers decided to stop playing with their food. And nearly every drive from that point on was a disaster. The quarterback throwing picks, Jalen getting crushed, sacks in the backfield, and with LSU finally playing like one of the top programs in the nation, Jalen was trying to fight off the feeling that maybe he didn't belong here. And late in the fourth quarter, this interception would perfectly sum up the afternoon. Despite the promising start, Vanderbilt got squashed, and after the loss, Jalen was reeling. One week he looked like a Heisman contender, the next like he was right back in high school. But just like that, all roads lead to week 7. Jalen soaked up every last minute inside the training facility, while Marcus was laser focused on a national championship, rolling over every team in his path, barely slowing down long enough to look back. And when the two caught up one final time before kickoff, Marcus made it very clear, Jalen would be no exception. You know I can't take it easy on you, right? I was going to say the same to you. Jalen versus Marcus. Underdog versus unstoppable force. The Knox Bowl was here.
Their whole lives they played side by side. Tonight, for the first time, they collide. Marcus Knox, college football's top defender for Alabama, and across the line, his twin brother Jalen, an overlooked back for Vanderbilt.
It was a rainy night in Nashville, but that didn't stop the fans from piling in, shoulder to shoulder, to witness the battle of the ages. After a quick empty drive from Bama's offense, it was finally time. The Knox twins would share the same field for the same game, only this time against each other. As Jalen took the first handoff, daylight appeared for just a split second, but Marcus crashed down instantly, planting him straight into the turf. Jalen felt it immediately, the sheer force of his brother, and as Marcus lay on top of him, he let him know it was going to be a long night. On the sideline, coaches told Jalen they'd have to scheme him away from number 44, but Jalen didn't want to back down from the challenge. And early on, Marcus was everywhere, and Jalen was struggling to get anything going. Vanderbilt faced an early 4th and 1, and the coaches decided to roll the dice. It's another handoff to Jalen, and Marcus stepped up, ready to blow up another run, but Jalen cut back hard, slipping through 2 tackles and rumbling forward for 23 yards. Marcus jogged back to the line smirking. He was proud, but not satisfied. He made sure that was the last run like that, buckling down and burying Jalen hard to kill Vanderbilt's momentum. Jalen was getting frustrated. Marcus, meanwhile, was tapping into a whole new level. On the very next drive, he jumped a route and snagged the ball clean out of the air. Alabama was rolling, and Jalen watched in awe. Marcus didn't even look like he was breaking a sweat out there. Down 7 and approaching halftime, Vanderbilt desperately needed a spark. Jalen needed something, anything, to swing the momentum. Instead, he was met by Marcus once again, who literally chuckled as he brought him to the ground. But Jalen wasn't folding. He popped right back up and started ripping off runs and dragged Vanderbilt across midfield. With 30 seconds left and no timeouts, the Commodores dialed up a screen pass, but Marcus sniffed it out instantly and took off in a full sprint, eyes locked on Jalen. But that's when instincts took over. Jalen threw up a vicious stiff arm right to the side of Marcus's helmet, launching him to the turf. The crowd exploded. Jalen Knox just put the nation's best defender, his own brother, in the dirt. Marcus popped back up stunned. For the first time ever, he realized he might have underestimated his brother. With the clock winding down before halftime, Vanderbilt rode the energy in the stadium, and Jalen slashed across the middle, hauling one in for the score. We have a tie ball game. Coming out of the break, Jalen stayed hot, ripping off a 20-yard run right out of the gate, and the stadium erupted again as Knox chants flooded First Bank Stadium. Marcus heard the chants echoing, and for the first time in his life, the cheers weren't for him. So he decided enough is enough. Vanderbilt dumped off a pass to Jalen, and Marcus detonated it on contact. Alabama's defense clamped down, flipped the momentum, and the Tide offense wasted no time reclaiming the lead. This game was a knockdown, drag-out fight. Jalen did everything in his power to keep Vanderbilt alive, but Bama's defense took over, leaving him with nowhere to go. Then late in the game, Vandy clawed their way back into the red zone, but Marcus Knox was inevitable. He shed the block, exploded into the backfield, and buried the quarterback, and that might have been the nail in the coffin. And as time ticked away, Alabama's air attack continued to overwhelm Vanderbilt's secondary, and another long touchdown sealed it. Final score, 21-14. Jalen's heart sank. He was crushed, being so close and still coming up short. But deep down though, he knew the truth. His brother was the difference in this one. Post-game, the two met at midfield. Marcus pulled Jalen in close and told him him he played a hell of a game, that he was a fighter, and now the whole country could see it. Jalen, still trying to stomach the sting of defeat, let the pride spill onto his face. Sure, he didn't win, but was he supposed to? He proved he could go toe-to-toe with the best in the country, and for now, that was enough. And as the teams exited the field, Jalen told Marcus to go win the natty for the both of them. Marcus just nodded. The Knox twins had gone blow for blow with the whole country watching, and the feeling hanging in the air was undeniable. College football would never be the same again. Following the win, Marcus was more fired up than ever. Alabama sat at 6-0, ranked 3rd in the nation, on a bullet train headed straight for the national championship. There was nothing hotter in college football than that, right? Except that's not what the country was talking about. The clip flooding everyone's timeline, Jalen Knox planting the nation's best linebacker into the turf. The stiff arm heard around the world. Marcus had the TFLs, the interception, hell, even the game-sealing sack, but all anyone wanted to talk about was that play.
Alabama gets the win, 21-14, but let's be honest, everybody's walking out of that stadium talking about that stiff arm.
Jalen Knox taking his brother, the best defensive player in the country, and planting him in the turf. I mean, Marcus was horizontal.
For the first time in his football career, Marcus Knox looked human. But that feeling didn't sit with him for long. It turned into fuel. He underestimated his brother once. He wouldn't make that mistake again. Marcus arrived at Tennessee like a man possessed, ready to give the nation something new to talk about. On the opening drive, he saw the game differently. His instincts were sharper, reactions quicker, jumping a route for an early interception. A play so good, it sent him into some state of shock. Marcus? The Tide offense rallied behind the turnover, quickly cashing in with 7, and Marcus went back out there, but he wasn't close to done. On the very next drive, he dropped back into coverage again, read the quarterback's eyes, and snagged another interception. The nation wasn't ready for this Marcus. The volunteer crowd was stunned, and the entire Bama sideline erupted, watching their superstar take over the game. But despite the turnovers, Tennessee hung around. Alabama's offense sputtered, and by the fourth quarter, the Tide were actually trailing by 4. The Vols drove deep into the red zone, threatening to extend their lead, and on 3rd and goal, Marcus knew giving up a score might mean their first loss. So he baited the route, peeled back, and intercepted his 3rd ball of the game. I don't know about you guys, but I feel a random drug test coming after today. Bama did nothing with it, but Marcus had done too much to lose this game. With a minute left and needing one last stop, he stayed disciplined, ignored the jet sweep, and crashed down the line to bury the back. The defense held, and this time, by the skin of their teeth, Bama marched right down and stole the game by 3 points, keeping their undefeated season alive. A generational performance Tide fans would never forget. Back in the locker room, Coach pulled Marcus aside, apparently bummed the defense didn't hold Tennessee to 1 touchdown. Geez, Coach, it's not like Marcus had 3 picks or anything. But even if the staff wasn't ready to praise him, the nation was. After that performance, Marcus was named National Player of the Week. I think it's safe to say that after the Knox Bowl, Marcus wasn't slowing down, and funny enough, hearing the country hype his brother while clowning him might have been the best thing that could have happened. He was quicker, stronger, hitting harder, and snagging interceptions like he'd been playing corner all season. And this one looked like it could go all the way. Oh my gosh, he's gonna do it. Oh, never mind. He's brought down at the 2. Sorry, Marcus, maybe touchdowns just aren't your thing. South Carolina became another victim of Marcus 3.0. Alabama rolled again, and now the question was unavoidable. Were they really going to run the table? After dismantling every ranked opponent in their way, only one team remained that could even hold a candle to the Tide. A small, tiny, very, very dimly lit candle, but a candle nonetheless. Marcus walked into Tiger Stadium with an ego the size of Louisiana. Opponents feared him, teammates wanted to be him, and even if he'd never admit it, his head was beginning to get too big for his helmet. Though you could argue if anyone had earned an ego, it was Marcus Knox. Against LSU, he didn't miss a beat, but the team around him did. The offense stalled, and when the Tigers kept the ball away from Marcus, the other Tide defenders weren't quick enough to stop them, letting up a score late in the 3rd quarter. And from there, everything unraveled. The offense still did nothing, and the defense was playing lights out, like if the lights were off. Like they couldn't see a thing. LSU tacked on another score, and this one just got ugly. By the final whistle, Alabama's perfect season had come to an end. And this is where things truly started to change for Marcus. For the first time, he truly understood it. He was only one of 22 players on the field. No matter how dominant he was, he couldn't fix everything. He was playing near flawless football, but he couldn't exactly play quarterback at the same time. Against a struggling Georgia team, Alabama avoided a complete collapse into a losing streak. But after watching the offense muster just 9 points, Marcus was having sophomore year flashbacks. This defense was special. Alabama could not waste it. At 10-1 with the postseason looming, Marcus wasn't exactly on cloud 9. Up in Nashville though, in the wake of their matchup, Jalen was living a different reality. He was determined to prove his performance against Marcus and Alabama was more than just a viral passing moment. It was the arrival of a new force in college football. Students all across campus were putting his stiff arm everywhere. Shirts, flags, posters, you name it. But the hype meant nothing if he couldn't build on it. But in Lexington, Kentucky made it clear they weren't going to let that happen. Vanderbilt's offense looked out of their depth and was collapsing on all fronts. But slowly slowly, Jalen imposed his will, showcasing the same strength he did against Bama, the same refusal to be brought down. The offense found their footing, and Jalen was tossing Wildcats aside like tackling dummies on his way to the end zone. In the end, Vanderbilt fell short, but Jalen Knox, now being labeled as the toughest back in the SEC, had officially arrived. Even as Vanderbilt quietly slipped into a 3-game losing streak, nobody doubted Jalen, not anymore. He even guaranteed a win in their next matchup, just to give reporters something to chew on. A bold move, but Jalen just wanted to silence any doubters that might still be out there. And against UL Monroe, he would do just that, opening the day with a run straight up the middle on 3rd down, dragging defenders across the goal line with him. Pretty soon, Jalen was running headfirst into hordes of Warhawks, and not even 3 of them could keep him out of the end zone. All that was nice, but he wanted to show he could do more than just run dudes over. He could get shifty in space too, weaving through traffic and hitting a second gear 55 yards to the house for his 3rd score of the day. Jalen spent the afternoon running a one-man track meet, leading Vanderbilt to a dominant win. For Jalen, the realization had began to set in. Losing to his brother lit a fuse for him. The nation had started taking him seriously, and for the first time in his career, it felt like the shadow he had spent years running from was finally behind him. At least, that's what he told himself. Jalen was gearing up for the final stretch of his junior year when he received a call. He and Marcus hadn't really talked much since their matchup, but one night, Marcus finally reached out just to vent. And like a good brother, Jalen listened as Marcus talked about a team wobbling under the weight of expectations and an offense that couldn't find consistency. Marcus went on for a while, and when he finally paused, Jalen hit him with some opinions of his own. Did I stiff arm you too hard or what? You're 10-1 heading to the playoffs, exactly where you wanted to be. I'm over here dragging a team week after week just trying to finish at 500. Keep your head up, and who knows, maybe next year we can chase something together. It was the first real brother-to-brother conversation they'd had in a long time, and Jalen wasn't exaggerating. He quite literally had the entire Vanderbilt program on his back. Against Auburn, it felt like he was the only spark on the offense. His motor never quit, and he kept chunking yardage, but before long, SEC defenses caught on. Auburn loaded the box, shut everything down, and sent Vanderbilt packing. But despite the loss, Jalen still carved his name into the program record books. With only 2 games left and nothing left to play for but pride, Jalen narrowed his focus down to just 2 goals. Finish strong and figure out what the hell the plan was for next year. Texas came next, and early on, Jalen ran hard, but it didn't take long for the Longhorns to commit fully to stopping number 6. The coaching staff tried to get creative, lining him up out wide, finding ways to feed him the ball, but there was only so much he could do. Texas swarmed him relentlessly, abandoning everything else, and Jalen paid the price. The Longhorns would win in a thrilling 3-2 victory in what had to be the biggest snooze fest of the season. But even in the loss, Jalen walked away with some newfound clarity, the kind only a certain type of beating could deliver. Vanderbilt's staff was already penciling him in as the centerpiece for next season, but Jalen wasn't sure that was what he even wanted anymore. He'd spent 2 years at Sam Houston and Vanderbilt really being the only weapon on the offense, and for once, he wanted to know what it felt like to have a full supporting cast. And there was one team up that felt long overdue. Going into the final game of the year, the mission was simple: upset number 18 ranked Tennessee and look good doing it. The Vols, however, didn't plan on making it easy, but on the opening drive, Jalen ran through 2 clean holes and walked untouched into the end zone. He might need to buy his offensive line dinner for that one. For the rest of the afternoon, Jalen ran himself into the ground. With the game tied at 7 and halftime approaching, he took a handoff, burst into the second level, weaved through traffic, and nearly broke free before being dragged down at the 3-yard line. Vanderbilt would have to settle for 3, but late in the 3rd quarter, Jalen got his get back, hitting the edge and high-stepping into the end zone to give Vanderbilt the lead. Tennessee, however, wasn't rolling over that easy, responding with a score, and with under 2 minutes left, Vandy trailed by 4. Jalen wasn't finding any space on the ground, so the coaches dialed up a deep shot. The throw was perfect, the catch was miraculous, and the Commodores went up with a minute left. And everyone thought it was over until a last-second field goal sent the game into overtime. Exhausted, Jalen stayed involved early, helping in the screen game to get the offense moving, but Tennessee adjusted quickly and bottled him up again. It was clear this game would require someone else to step up, and on 3rd and 5, the quarterback fired it quick to the tight end in the end zone for a touchdown. One clutch defensive stop later, and Vanderbilt had pulled off the upset. For Jalen and the Commodores, you couldn't script a better ending. Jalen's junior year was officially in the books and concluded with a Doak Walker Award, first-team All-SEC, and All-American honors. But as the accolades poured in, he felt something else. Watching his brother prepare for a playoff run stirred something deeper in him. Maybe next year they could chase something together. With Jalen's season over, all attention shifted to Marcus, who was on his own mission. After a roller coaster year, Alabama had punched their ticket to the SEC Championship, a revenge matchup against LSU, the only team to hand the Tide a loss this season, a blemish on Marcus's otherwise flawless campaign. The stakes were massive, and as Marcus took the field, he knew it, not just for a title, but for legacy, a chance to remind everyone why he was the best Knox to ever step on the field. And the entire family was packed in, ready to watch Marcus make a statement. The defense took the field first, and Marcus was eager to get his get back, but on the opening play, the Tigers went deep downfield, completely torching the secondary for a 70-yard score. Alabama's offense stalled, no surprise there, and Marcus knew he couldn't afford to start slow in this one. one. So on third down, he came flying downhill, laying the hammer to force the stop. But the offense failed to capitalize. So Marcus kept doing what he does, punishing runners, killing drives, playing his brand of football. Alabama finally found points and the game turned into a war. Marcus kept flying around sideline to sideline, but LSU kept getting right back up. Then in the third quarter, the rush got home, forced the ball out, and it scooped up and taken all the way back for 6. And Marcus sprinted the length of the field just to lay someone out for good measure. Late in the game, Alabama held a slim lead, but LSU was driving. Marcus did everything he could to try and call game, but the Tigers would eventually sneak one in, and this one was going to overtime. And in the most dramatic fashion possible, Alabama's defense would come through clutch with a pick 6 and walk-off touchdown in overtime. Marcus and the Tide lock up the SEC, getting their revenge and securing their spot in the college football playoff. With a round 1 bye locked up, Marcus finally had time to sit back and scout the competition, but it didn't take long before Alabama found themselves staring down a familiar foe, the Oklahoma Sooners. You know, just the team that pushed Bama to the brink earlier in the year. Marcus walked onto the field fully prepared for a war, expecting the competition to stiffen with every passing week. Instead, his defense did this. Let's go ahead and count them together. An interception in the first quarter, returned all the way for a 6, another interception on the very next drive, then a third, then a fourth, and finally, number 5. 5 total interceptions for Alabama's defense. Marcus wasn't asked to be Superman in this one, and honestly, he didn't need to be. He still made his presence felt, forcing a fumble and flying around as usual, but for the most part, he was just out there running cardio while his defense did the heavy lifting. Alabama sent Oklahoma home a little sooner than they would have liked, and just like that, Marcus Knox was 1 win away from a national championship appearance. And after the win, having watched his brother play under the brightest lights, Jalen felt that familiar itch creep back in. Seeing Marcus on the field reignited something competitive in him, and when he reached out to congratulate Marcus, he made it clear. Next year was their year, together, just like they'd always planned. Marcus agreed without any hesitation, and the idea of the twins finally taking over college football side by side felt inevitable. But before he could even think about how to decorate their dorm room, Marcus still had unfinished business. Business by the name of Florida State in the college football semifinal. Even with an SEC title and a playoff win under his belt, Marcus wasn't satisfied, not even close. And for the first time ever, he looked more machine than twin. Alabama, now ranked number 2 in the country, opened the game by scoring a touchdown. Marcus was caught off guard, but he wasn't about to get comfortable. On Florida State's opening drive, a screen pass barely had time to develop before Marcus sniffed it out, exploded downhill, and detonated the back for a loss. Just like that, the tone was set immediately. On 4th and inches, the Seminoles decided to go for it, but Alabama's defensive front had other plans. Off the snap, 4 defenders teleported into the backfield, blowing up the play before it even got going. The offense kept pace, and the defense kept the pressure cranked up to 11. A safety would take the Florida State offense off the field, and by the third quarter, Alabama held a 12-point lead, but Marcus wasn't taking his foot off the gas. He kept filling gaps like a pro, stuffing runs and blowing up plays before they started. In the fourth quarter, the Seminoles were searching for anything, a sign of life to cling to, but Marcus wasn't going to give them one. He was out to finish it, and that's exactly what he did. Marcus Knox and Alabama punched their ticket to the national championship. As the team celebrated, Marcus was stone cold. He wouldn't be satisfied until he lifted that trophy himself. And now, this was it. It was here. An entire season of blood, sweat, and punishment, all culminating into one game. The very game Marcus had spent his entire life working to reach. The national championship. Against Clemson in the rain. It doesn't get more cinematic than this. And no amount of bad weather was going to slow Marcus down. He immediately got to work, making his presence on the field felt. Alabama forced a quick 3 and out, and to absolutely no one's surprise, the offense couldn't do anything with their own possession. Clemson wasn't exactly moving the ball either, and for a long stretch, the game just wasn't moving. Both offenses were stuck in the mud, while Marcus had the defense hunting. Until late in the second quarter, Clemson finally broke through with an end zone strike over Marcus's head, but Alabama answered right back with a touchdown of their own. Tied at 7, approaching halftime, and with neither team holding firm control, Marcus knew he was going to have to be the difference in this one. Clemson was held to just a field goal, and Alabama scored coming out of the break to take the lead. The momentum felt like it was shifting, but late in the third quarter, Clemson landed another blow, a long strike over the middle, and not a single soul in the secondary could recover. And just like that, the Tigers reclaimed the lead. Thankfully, Alabama responded with a field goal, tying the game at 17, and now in the fourth quarter, Marcus could feel it, a national title just minutes away. But he wasn't going to just wait for it, he wanted it now. He crashed through the line, shed the block, and buried the quarterback for a sack. The stadium erupted, and as the rain poured harder, Marcus looked like he was just getting started. And on 3rd and 5, he was looking for another, ready to put this game on ice. He took off on the blitz again, brushed past the back, but this time the QB was quick to escape. No edge was set on the other side, and the Tigers surged forward for a massive gain and a fresh set of downs. Still, Alabama's defense refused to fold. They forced Clemson back into another 3rd and long, and with 2 minutes left, Marcus and the Tide dialed up the pressure, looking for the dagger, overwhelming the line and burying the quarterback yet again. The defense did their job, Clemson punted, and now it was all on the offense. An offense that had struggled all season, now given one final chance to prove themselves. Marcus stood on the sideline and watched hopelessly as it all unraveled. The offense is brought down for a safety, and Clemson goes up by 2 with a minute to play. Marcus took the field one last time, and with 3 timeouts and a dream, Bama needed a miracle. Just one stop. And Marcus was not rolling over, coming through with a huge TFL on 2nd down. Timeout called. 3rd and 3, one more stop was all they needed. Marcus takes off for the QB, but it's thrown quick and completed on a shallow route over the middle. 1st down Clemson. Every Alabama fan felt their stomach drop. From there, the Tigers kneel it out and Marcus was stunned. As the orange confetti fell, he stood frozen, watching the Tigers celebrate with his trophy. Marcus walked off the field alone, sick to his stomach. He had done everything possible and it still wasn't enough. Back at his locker, a text from Jalen appeared. "Next year we'll finish it together." Marcus started to type, then stopped. He couldn't find the words. And when his coach came over to console him, he finally spoke, saying it couldn't end like this. He was going to transfer after this year and team up with his brother. But this needed to be done. He needed this. Marcus finally picked up the phone to Jalen. He was staying in Alabama. He couldn't leave it like this. He had to win it all, and it had to be here. Hearing this, Jalen felt a wave of anger overcome him. Betrayal even. After months of talking, planning, and dreaming about finally teaming up, Marcus was backing out now? You're really gonna choose Bama over us? Marcus didn't even answer. And suddenly, with senior year looming, the bond between the twins, once unbreakable, was beginning to crack. Jalen gave Marcus space. He knew what that game meant to him, and losing it couldn't have been easy. He figured in some time that Marcus would come to his senses and that this whole "I'm going back to Bama" thing was just a knee-jerk reaction to a tough loss. Eventually, he'd cool off. But weeks passed and nothing, not even a text. The two had always trained together in the offseason, always. So this radio silence, yeah, that wasn't normal. So Jalen swallowed his pride and picked up the phone. "If you're serious about staying, then I'll transfer to Bama. I can help you finish this thing." Marcus's response came quick, and the sharpness of his words caught Jalen by surprise. "Jay, you know I'd want that, but this locker room is different, something you've never experienced. We already have our guy at RB, and coach doesn't mess with the rotation. I can't risk it." Those words hit Jalen like a knife. Risk what exactly? Playing with your brother? Marcus took a long pause, mulling over what to say. "You don't get it, Jay. This isn't about us anymore." "You're right, Marcus. As usual, it's all about you." The line went dead and the twins haven't spoken since. Just like that, Jalen's entire senior year plan went up in flames, and with rosters filling quickly, he had to make a decision and fast. He knew he couldn't go back to Vanderbilt. He had outgrown that program. For a second, he considered transferring to Alabama anyway, just to spite Marcus, but with things the way they were, he couldn't stomach the idea of sharing a locker room with him. Prior to now, every time he envisioned his senior year, Marcus was there alongside him. But now, he had a new motivation. Be the best damn running back in the country. With limited options and a chip on his shoulder the size of the Pacific Northwest, Jalen found his new home. In the Big Ten, Jalen Knox was off to Washington. The moment he touched down in Seattle, coach made it very clear. What he did at Vanderbilt didn't matter here. The stats, the records, the reputation, none of it. If he wanted RB1, he'd have to earn it. And honestly, Jalen welcomed that. He had always been better when he had something to prove. By the end of his first practice, coach had seen enough. Jalen was the new RB1 for the Huskies. Jalen entered senior year as an 84 overall, pissed off and ready to run through the Big Ten. And before long, his first victim had arrived. As Jalen took the field for the season opener, there was a hollow feeling in his chest, but it was buried beneath a whole lot of anger, and against Boise State, he saw Marcus's face under the helmet of every Bronco. Washington opened the year ranked 15th in the nation, hungry for a deep run, led by their flashy new back. Jalen took a screen pass, followed his blocks, and walked into the end zone for the first score of the season. Early on, Jalen was being given the full bell cow treatment, and he hadn't ripped off a home run yet, but he didn't need to. Off the play fake, Jalen threw a block, and his QB fired a rope down the seam, 60 yards straight to the end zone for a touchdown. Pair that with him finally breaking loose for his longest run of the day, and yeah, Washington could be a problem this year. Jalen wasn't just running angry, crashing into defenders like a freight train, he was doing more than that. Every carry felt personal. He was playing with a determination so strong, nothing could stop him. A couple of touchdowns and one dominant win later, it didn't take long for Jalen to earn his first national recognition of the new season. The early Heisman whispers were already beginning to circulate, and as the headlines rolled in, Jalen's first thought was simple: choke on that, Marcus. Meanwhile, down in Tuscaloosa, Marcus was preparing for his own revenge tour. He hated how he left things with Jalen, and he even reached for the phone a few times, but he couldn't let himself get distracted, not with a greater mission at hand. For Alabama, it was national championship or bust. He spent the offseason pushing himself harder than ever before, practically living in the facility. When the season arrived, Marcus didn't even look like the same player, and he knew if Alabama was going to avoid another heartbreak, something had to change. And after practice one day, he stepped into Coach Sweeney's office. "Coach, I need to have more of an impact. correct. I've thought about it, and I want to be on the edge this year. At first, Coach Sweeney laughed. Moving the best defender in the country out of the position he dominated for 3 years sounded insane. Then he stopped laughing and gave it a second thought, unless it was to put him even closer to the quarterback. By the time the conversation ended, Marcus had his answer. For senior year, he was Alabama's newest edge rusher. But there would be no time to ease into the new position, because right out of the gate, Bama was on the road to take on Notre Dame. Alabama was entering the season ranked higher than they'd ever been to start the year, and from the very first snap, once the Irish saw Marcus lined up on the edge, the quarterback quickly audibled to a run the other way. Early on, Marcus's inexperience at edge showed. He shot into the backfield but grabbed the wrong man on a read option. He thought if he could attack the handoff early enough, it didn't matter who had the ball, but it was pulled quick and Notre Dame was gone for an 80-yard touchdown run. Coach Sweeney knew this change was bound to be accompanied by some growing pains, and he wasn't ready to pull the plug on this thing just yet. On the very next drive, Marcus responded. He powered through the tackle and chased down the quarterback for his first sack of senior year. He lined back up and immediately split a double team on the next play for back-to-back sacks. Just like that, the nation saw what Marcus Knox could become at this new position. Fast forward to the third quarter, Bama was clinging to a 3-point lead and needed something big from the defense. So Marcus delivered. He shed a block and blew up a run, forcing a fumble. Crimson Tide ball. You could say Marcus looked like a natural at the position, and even when Notre Dame pulled a guard his way, he was just too quick, teleporting into the backfield to blow up another play. But late in the fourth quarter, with Bama up by 2, his inexperience came back at the worst time. He failed to set the edge, Notre Dame escaped contain, and scrambled in for a touchdown and the lead. And by the time he got back out there, the Irish figured out just how to neutralize him. Quick throws and exploiting the secondary to tack on another score. The damage was done, and before long, Alabama had fallen to 0-1 in what was supposed to be their revenge season. Staring at the scoreboard, Marcus was furious. He demanded perfection from his teammates and most of all from himself. And normally this is where he'd pick up the phone to Jalen, lean on his brother for some pick-me-up words, but that wasn't going to happen. Marcus didn't need encouragement, he just needed the next opponent. Coaches made sure their best player kept his head held high, and just when it felt like nothing would take his mind off the loss, Gatorade came calling with an offer Marcus couldn't refuse. With one stroke of a pen, Marcus Knox made NIL history, becoming the highest paid collegiate athlete of all time. Gatorade got their new poster athlete, and there's even talks of Marcus getting his own flavor, so be on the lookout for that. But still, with no one around to share it all with, it was right back to work. Week 2 was a must-win game, and thankfully, it was only Central Michigan. The perfect opportunity to get this whole pass rush thing down. This time around, Marcus stayed disciplined. He didn't bite on anything, and it paid off early. Coach even had a light bulb moment, situationally flipping him back to middle linebacker, and suddenly, Central Michigan had no idea what to do. He dominated like he never left, but when he got to do what he really wanted to, we saw a new level of domination. Marcus came through with a sack, and then another, getting to the QB on back-to-back plays. Alabama took care of business, moved to 1-1, and didn't slow down against Oklahoma State. Marcus's elite combination of speed and power was on full display early, bullying every tackle unlucky enough to line up across from him. He was on his way to another rush when the QB fired it quick and the receiver slipped one tackle, then another, and then snatched a pair of ankles on his way to the end zone. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, that might just be the most miserable play I've ever seen. Marcus knew he couldn't rely on the people behind him to make the plays, not today. So in the fourth quarter, he turned it up and got to the QB in a hurry for a sack. OSU rushed back to the line, fighting against the clock, but Marcus wanted more. Make that 3 sacks on the day for Marcus Knox and another win for Alabama. Meanwhile, over in Seattle, Jalen couldn't escape Marcus's face. His highlights were playing everywhere. ESPN, TikTok, YouTube, literally everywhere. The nation loved him, and to Jalen, every highlight was just another reminder of what he wasn't a part of anymore. Jalen knew his brother was moving different this year, but if that natty loss had unleashed something in Marcus, it had done the same to him. Against number 23 ranked Tennessee, the Vols were determined not to let him run away with things. They buckled down, and early on, Jalen was barely averaging 2 yards a carry. It wasn't exactly a recipe for success, but Jalen wanted this competition. Adjustments were made, and the Husky offense started to find a rhythm. Jalen took a handoff and went untouched for Washington's first score of the day. And then in the second quarter, he'd give Knoxville a whole new meaning, taking a handoff and going 39 yards to the house for another touchdown. And if you've been following along, seeing Jalen get in the end zone wasn't anything new. What was new was watching his quarterback drop 60-yard dimes to the back of the end zone. Just a few weeks into the season, and Washington was already making their case for the best offense in the nation. Jalen printed out another Heisman-level performance, forcing the country to share some of that spotlight Marcus had been hogging. And once the nation had Jalen in their sights, he never left them. Every week, analysts found themselves asking, what more can this kid do? And every week, Jalen found a way to answer. Whether it was taking over in the receiving game or gliding through blocks like prime Le'Veon Bell, the production never slowed. The Huskies kept climbing, looking every bit like true contenders in the Big Ten. For the Twins, weeks were flying by, and while the wins stacked up, the absence of the bond they once shared started to weigh on both of them. Neither was willing to give an inch, and eventually their father Elijah decided it was time to step in. So you boys really aren't talking after everything you've been through. Dad, I don't want to get into it. I tried explaining it to him. He just doesn't get that this is something I have to do. I hear you, son, but he's your brother. You can't forget that. I know, but he just left. Like all the plans we made just meant nothing, and I'm supposed to be okay with that? Both twins were standing firm, refusing to budge. And if they wouldn't communicate face to face, then the football field became the next best place to do it. With every passing week, headlines followed the twins. The media knew they were at odds, and they loved pouring gasoline on the fire. Jalen would explode with monster performances, earth-shattering runs, multiple touchdowns, and the broadcast would immediately cut to Marcus responding with sacks and game-changing plays of his own. Alabama and Washington were both red hot, and before long, the country was locked into a two-man Heisman race, with whispers growing louder that maybe, just maybe, the trophy would have to be shared for the first time ever. Marcus and the Tide handled a Jalen-less Vanderbilt team, and by this point, multiple sacks and TFLs felt routine, but when Marcus got back to his locker, reporters were already waiting.
Great win out there, Marcus. Question for you. You and your brother used to talk about going pro together. Is that still something you want?
Look, Jalen's a great player, and I'd love nothing more, but honestly, it's not on my mind, at least not right now. If it happens, it happens. My focus is getting Alabama back to the national championship. And he meant it. Marcus wasn't slowing down. LSU would try to, sticking him with double teams all afternoon, but Marcus eventually sealed the game anyway. It wasn't pretty, but Alabama just kept stacking wins and started to feel like a team of destiny. They moved to 6-1, and then came Missouri. That was the day Marcus catapulted himself to the top of the Heisman conversation. He opened the day by putting the tackle in a spin cycle, and even when the back bounced outside, he'd still get there to stop the play short. Once Alabama had built a lead, Marcus went hunting. His first sack came easy, then another, and by the end of the night, he didn't have 1, 2, or even 3. He had 4 total sacks. Scouts were throwing out comparisons like James Harrison, and for the first time, it didn't feel like just hype. The Crimson Tide were on a warpath, beating down teams each and every week, and with senior year already more than halfway through, Marcus finally decided this feud had gone on long enough. So he pulled out his phone and shot off a quick text to Jalen, hoping his brother would feel the same way. Meanwhile, in Seattle, Jalen wasn't anywhere close to letting it go. In fact, for Jalen, the tension was quickly approaching a boiling point. He'd watched Marcus shatter the NIL market, he'd watched him creep ahead in the Heisman race, and the question began to grow in his mind. Could anything be just his? Washington was rolling, but the anger that fueled Jalen on Saturdays was starting to spill into the rest of the week. His fuse became shorter, he snapped at teammates when the ball didn't come his way, looked for contact even when he didn't need to, and chirped at defenders after nearly every play. Even his academics had taken a back seat. He was flirting with full-blown locker room cancer status, but as long as he kept producing on the field, coaches were willing to look the other way. For now. After a gritty win over Illinois where Jalen carried a load again, the Huskies cracked into the top 5 for the first time all season. And when he walked back into the locker room riding that high, he was surprised to see a text from Marcus waiting for him. Jalen stared at the message for a long time. A lot of his anger came from the fact that Marcus wasn't even reaching out, and now here he was, finally trying. For a second, Jalen felt the anger soften. Maybe things didn't have to stay like this. But as he started to type, a new alert came across his screen. College star Marcus Knox has no interest in going pro with brother Jalen.
You and your brother used to talk about going pro together. Is that still something you want?
Honestly, not right now. If it happens, it happens. My focus is getting Alabama back to the national championship. Jalen's blood boiled. When he looked back at the text, it didn't feel sincere anymore, and his thumbs moved before his better judgment could stop him. If it happens, it happens. Right now, I'm taking Washington to the national championship. That boiling point we talked about? Yeah, this was it. He hit practice that week with a different kind of intensity, and coaches could see it, a fire burning hotter than ever. Everyone just hoped he'd aim it at the right target. Unfortunately, for number 2 ranked Michigan, they were next. 2 top 5 teams, a heavyweight matchup sure to have playoff implications. There was no room for weakness. On Jalen's first carry, he was swallowed up instantly, but he popped right back up, and on the very next snap, ripped off a 40-yard run to put the Huskies deep into Wolverine territory. But after that, Michigan tightened down, and even though Jalen would try to get involved by any means necessary, the defense just wasn't letting that happen. Washington was forced to settle for 3, and suddenly, the nation's number 1 offense looked human. The ground game was going nowhere, passes were off target, and now the doubt began to creep in. For a moment, Jalen wondered if they'd been fooling themselves all this time. Maybe they weren't built for this level. The defense kept Washington in the fight, and in the second half, Jalen took matters into his own hands. When the play calls weren't working, he decided to improvise. He found space in the passing game and dragged the offense back into striking distance. And once Michigan adjusted, it opened the door for a huge touchdown strike that put Washington in front. But the real MVP of this game, the Husky defense, stepped up, turning over Michigan in the red zone, and here they were, staring down an opportunity to really establish a lead. Another strike from the QB did just that, and in the blink of an eye, Washington stretched the lead to 2 scores. But even though the scoreboard looked nice, Jalen couldn't shake the feeling. He had struggled today, and with a Heisman Trophy still in his sights, he was determined not to leave Ann Arbor without at least one play for voters to hang their hat on. And with 1 minute to play, Jalen lined up for one more carry. He burst straight up the middle into open space, and with two Wolverines closing in, somehow he broke free of both of them, and from there, no one could touch him. Washington walked out of Michigan with a statement win, silencing any doubters out there that said they weren't a true contender. The locker room was electric, and confidence was through the roof. Everything was trending upward, until the phone rang. Ineligible? What do you mean I'm ineligible? I'm sorry, Jalen, I've been trying to reach you for weeks, but you've let your classes slip. You know the rule. Football comes second. Jalen just stood there, speechless. First came anger, then disbelief, and then that sinking feeling in his chest. He pleaded with coaches, with advisors, but it didn't matter. This was his new reality. He'd been so consumed with winning, with chasing the Heisman, and proving something to Marcus that everything else fell to the side. Missed assignments, skipped classes, all in the interest of football. Jalen had told himself it was nothing to worry about, but the truth is, it was far worse than he could have imagined. And now, the frontrunner for college football's biggest award was sidelined. For Washington's shot at a Big Ten title, this was devastating, and for his Heisman campaign, it felt like a death sentence. The news didn't stay quiet for long, and when it finally broke, the media had a field day.
2 games in November. When you're
How
the Heisman
irresponsible
frontrunner,
can you be?
that
It's
is
not
a
an injury.
self-inflicted wound I can't wrap my head
How
around.
irresponsible can you be? It's not an injury. It's not bad luck. It's showing up, doing the work in the classroom. That's the deal.
Every outlet ran the story, each headline twisting the knife a little deeper. News of Jalen's suspension spread like wildfire, and when it reached Tuscaloosa, Marcus was floored. Bama's locker room went wild, and every teammate congratulated him on a free path to the Heisman, but Marcus wasn't exactly celebrating. Suddenly, for the first time all year, football felt small. He didn't feel like the nation's best player. He felt like a brother watching the other half of himself fall apart. He wanted to check in on Jalen, but he also had a job to do. Alabama was chasing perfection, and the season wouldn't slow down for anyone. When the Tide traveled to take on South Carolina, Marcus was moving like a man on a mission. He had officially reached elite edge rusher status, and after a quick sack to open the game, Marcus was in search for another. Only this time, he was in the right place at just the right time. His teammate brings down the quarterback, the ball popped out, and off pure instinct, Marcus scooped it up and took off straight towards the end zone. In 4 years, it felt like the only thing he hadn't done was score a touchdown. He'd come close, but it never happened. Until now. Nothing was going to stop him as he walked into the end zone for his first ever collegiate touchdown. And even on the road, Heisman chants echoed throughout the stadium. The nation had never seen a defender dominate quite like this, and he wouldn't stop there. He secured yet another sack, and then one more for good measure, this time knocking the ball out in the process. By the end of the night, Alabama rolled to another win, and Marcus Knox stood alone at the top of the Heisman race. Meanwhile, up in Seattle, Jalen was sitting on the couch watching it all unfold. He watched Marcus dominate, watched the entire country cheer for him, and watched his own team fall to Oregon without him. Sitting alone in his dorm, he pulled out his phone and read Marcus's text again, the one he still hadn't answered. And for the first time all season, a new feeling crept in. He started to wonder if he'd been the one getting in his own way. All this time, he'd been chasing vengeance, trying to prove he didn't need his brother, while simultaneously blaming him for everything. But what had it actually gotten him? A suspension, a losing team, and a season slipping through his fingers. The next 2 weeks felt like an eternity. The nation stopped talking about him altogether, and college football kept moving along like he never existed. When his suspension was finally served and the spotlight had faded, Jalen did something he hadn't done all year. He looked in the mirror, and for the first time, he didn't recognize the person staring back. Something had to change. He couldn't undo what happened, and he couldn't forgive Marcus overnight, but at the end of the day, brothers are brothers. With Washington's season hanging in the balance and Ohio State coming to town, it was finally time for Jalen to return to the field and remind everyone who he was. Who he really was. His name had completely fallen off the Heisman ballot, but that didn't matter to him anymore. This time, it wasn't about headlines or proving a point, he just wanted to help his team. His first handoff went nowhere. His second, more of the same. There was rust for sure, but the real question was how quickly could he shake it off? The first drive stalled, but when Washington's defense gifted the offense incredible field position, Jalen saw his opportunity. He bounced outside, spotted the smallest crease, and slipped through it and found the end zone. It wasn't spectacular, but it was a start. On the next drive, something felt different, lighter. Once he let go of the anger he'd been carrying around for months, it was like the shackles came off. He wasn't forcing anything anymore, he was just playing. He moved the offense methodically down the field, and when they reached the red zone, coach kept the ball in his hands. Jalen took the handoff and powered his way in for his second score of the afternoon. His comeback was unfolding in real time, the kind of return you could only script in a movie. Washington secured a massive win, reviving their postseason hopes, and Jalen reminded the nation exactly who he was. But he didn't stop there. Against Northwestern, he would put together a highlight highlight reel that would make even Tavon Austin jealous, all in a single half of football. With the season winding down, he was making it impossible for Heisman voters to ignore him. He became impossible to define. A player who carried his team through the first half of the season, fell apart under his own ego, served a 2-game suspension, and came back playing more electric than ever. What do you even do with a player like that? Washington was alive again, but what no one saw coming was what was happening in Tuscaloosa. Marcus was still dominating defensively, still living in backfields and blowing up plays, but suddenly the margins were shrinking. What started as blowouts every single week turned into nail-biters, but that was only the beginning. Against Oklahoma, the defense completely unraveled, and it wasn't because of number 44. Marcus opened with a sack and later chased down a touchdown-saving tackle, but as he knows all too well, he can't do everything. The Sooners kept finding the end zone, and it felt like if Marcus wasn't in the backfield on top of the QB in an instant, no one else knew what to do. Alabama found themselves down 2 scores in the fourth quarter, but Marcus refused to just hand the game over. He spun off a block, drilled the running back, and forced a fumble. Unfortunately, the Tide couldn't recover, and on the very next play, what do you know, it's an Oklahoma touchdown. Bama's offense was missing all night, and by the final whistle, Oklahoma handed Alabama their second loss of the season. An absolutely miserable showing from everyone not named Marcus Knox. Needless to say, Marcus was furious, and after one of the most embarrassing losses in recent memory, the entire locker room turned to him looking for guidance. Marcus stood up and delivered a speech that would rival Spencer James himself. Marcus spoke about responsibility, about doing your job for the man next to you, and about pride. With one regular season game left and their postseason hopes hanging by a thread, everything came down to Auburn. The defense held firm, locking down Auburn for most of the game, but through 3 quarters, Alabama had only managed a field goal. Marcus kept his unit steady, trusting the offense would finally wake up, and they did, doing just enough to force overtime. Auburn struck first, and thankfully Bama would respond, and from there it was 2-point conversions only. Auburn came out in empty, and Marcus knew exactly what was coming. At the snap, he shot downhill untouched, exploding into the backfield and dragging down the quarterback in an instant. Marcus Knox had just single-handedly saved Alabama's season. With the regular season finally at a close, both twins stood on opposite sides of the country, battered, tested, but still very much alive. Conference title week had arrived, and soon after that, the playoffs. Marcus had led Alabama to a second straight SEC championship appearance, and as he prepared for the game, he received a text from Jalen. Marcus smiled as he read it. One text wasn't magically going to repair their fractured relationship, but it was a sign that maybe the ice between them was finally starting to thaw. But I'll tell you where the ice wasn't thawing, in Marcus's veins. As he took the field, the weight of the moment didn't seem to faze him. Last year, everything about the postseason had been brand new, but this time around, he was ready for it. And to Marcus, anything short of a national championship was a failure. Georgia came out fighting, determined to make things interesting. Marcus struggled to get involved early, and the Bulldogs were able to slowly march down the field, wearing out the defense before finally punching it into the end zone for the game's first points. And with Bama failing to answer with 7 of their own, Marcus knew it was up to him to change the momentum. Back on the field, he flew into the backfield and buried the quarterback for his first sack of the day. The defense kept Georgia on their toes, and Bama's offense finally began to find a rhythm. Marcus was feeling unstoppable, but his dominance wouldn't end there. In the fourth quarter, Georgia held the lead, but Marcus tracked the ball carrier, crashed downhill, and laid the hammer. The hit jarred the ball loose, and Marcus fell on the fumble himself, giving Alabama the life they desperately needed. The stadium erupted, and we're getting the full Marcus Knox experience in the SEC championship. His turnover turned into points, forcing the game into overtime, where Marcus was more than ready to finish the job. Off the snap, he beat the tackle on an inside move and buried the quarterback yet again, sealing the game. For the second straight year, Alabama locked up the SEC title off the back of a generational performance from the best defensive player in the country. The Tide celebrated on the field, and Marcus cracked a smile, but nothing more. With a first-round bye secured, all attention shifted to Seattle, where the Stars had aligned and paved the way for Jalen and Washington to make their own conference title appearance. What had recently looked like a doomed season was suddenly alive again, and this time Jalen was determined not to waste it. As the Huskies prepared to take on USC in the Big Ten Championship, Jalen received his own good luck text. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the twins felt a little like brothers again. To Jalen, it meant everything, and it gave him just the confidence boost he needed heading into his first conference championship game. As he took the field, the butterflies in his stomach were flipping all over the place. He knew exactly what was on the line today. His own legacy. He refused to be the Knox who fell short. The number 2 ranked Trojans struck first, putting up 3 points, and now it was Washington's turn to respond. Jalen's number was called immediately, and on his first handoff, he spotted a crease and didn't hesitate, bursting through the hole, and he raced forward for a 45-yard gain. The stadium shook, and as the crowd began chanting his name, the nerves disappeared. The game was on. After that first carry, the Trojans buckled down, forcing Jalen to fight for every yard he earned. A few plays later, he slipped out of the backfield, snagged a quick dump-off pass, and dragged 2 defenders into the end zone for Washington's first touchdown of the game. But from that point forward, the game slowed down. Running lanes became harder and harder to find, and Washington struggled to consistently move the ball. It was obvious the Trojans had done their homework. They knew exactly how to slow down number 6. They keyed on every handoff and blanketed him on every route out of the backfield. Jalen knew this was going to be a battle, but even he was surprised. This was tougher than anything he'd faced before. USC extended their lead late in the fourth quarter, and with just 3 minutes remaining, Washington trailed by 10. Jalen took the field knowing the offense needed something fast. He took a handoff up the middle, bounced outside, and raced out of bounds to stop the clock. With just over 2 minutes to play, the coach dialed up another run, a gutsy call, and Jalen had to make the most of it. After struggling to find space all day, he took the handoff back up the middle, read his blocks, and hit the edge. Not a single Trojan had the angle, and Jalen Knox walked untouched into the end zone. The deficit was now down to 3. All Washington needed was one stop. They didn't get it. Jalen finished his day with 170 yards and 2 touchdowns, but it wasn't enough. Washington had lost the Big Ten championship, suffering a critical blow to their playoff hopes, and all Jalen could do now was hope the college football committee had seen enough to give them a chance. But finding out their decision would have to wait, because now the moment both twins had been waiting for had finally arrived. Marcus and Jalen received their invitations, put on their suits red and purple, and headed to New York City. It was time for the Heisman ceremony. When the two arrived at Lincoln Center, it was unlike anything either of them had ever experienced. They were used to stadiums packed with screaming fans, but here it was different. Cameras flashing everywhere, reporters swarming the red carpet, the entire scene felt surreal. Marcus and Jalen eventually found one another among the sea of paparazzi and awkwardly embraced. They hadn't spoken face to face in months, and somehow in that moment, neither of them really knew what to say. But before long, the two were seated and the ceremony began. The nation knew it would come down to these two, but no one truly knew which way it would swing. Marcus Knox had become college football's ultimate defender, a one-man wrecking crew. Sacks, tackles for loss, even defensive touchdowns. He was the engine behind Alabama's push for back-to-back national title appearances. And Jalen, he had gone from being known as Marcus's brother to the best running back in the country. From bursting onto the scene at Vanderbilt to dominating at Washington, where he elevated his game to a level no one thought possible. His rise in college football wasn't dumb luck, it was long overdue. As the twins shared the stage waiting for the announcement, years of backyard battles and late-night practice sessions flashed through both of their minds.
And the Heisman Memorial Trophy goes to Jalen Knox, University of Washington.
It could have gone either way, and plenty would argue that Marcus had been robbed, but nobody could deny it. Jalen Knox had earned this moment. As the applause roared through the room, Jalen stood there stunned. For a kid who had spent his whole life living in someone else's shadow, finally stepping into the spotlight felt almost unreal. He looked over at Marcus, who was smiling, clapping, and even pulling him in for a hug. Jalen stepped up to the podium, and as the cheers slowly settled, he began to speak. Wow, I don't really know what to say other than I'm honored. I want to thank my coaches, my teammates, my father, and my brother Marcus. It's been a crazy season. Marcus watched his brother standing at the podium beaming with pride. Marcus was smiling, but behind the grin, something else was beginning to grow. A fire. Not of jealousy, but the truth. Marcus was proud of his brother, he really was, but he couldn't ignore what the nation had just told him. For the very first time, Jalen Knox was the better twin. I just want to say thank you and go Huskies. As the ceremony ended and the twins made their way out, they shared one final goodbye, because both of them knew their story wasn't finished, not yet. For the nation's newest Heisman winner, the good news continued rolling in. Despite losing in the Big Ten championship, the nation wanted to see more of Jalen Knox. Washington had done just enough to sneak into one of the final playoff spots, drawing a matchup against the Texas Longhorns in the first round. And even though they were playing this one at home, as Jalen took the field, he could feel the energy in the air. It was different. He was stepping into uncharted territory. He'd been to plenty of playoff games before, but only in the stands cheering Marcus on. Now it was his turn to make history. Coming off the biggest award in college football, the Longhorns knew exactly who to target. They keyed on Jalen's every carry, making it nearly impossible for Washington to get anything going. Drive after drive stalled out, but the thing about Jalen is that you can only keep him down for so long. Sooner or later, he breaks through. At the goal line, the quarterback floated a pass to the flats, Jalen secured it and tight-roped the sideline, slipping into the end zone for the first points of the game. And from that moment on, every yard he gained was hard fought. Jalen was getting hit again and again, and coach was ready to take him out for a series or two, not wanting to burn out his best weapon in the very first round, but Jalen refused. He'd rest when the job was finished. Right before halftime, he split out wide and delivered a monster block, paving the way for another Husky touchdown. Texas finally got on the board and cut the lead close, and in the fourth quarter, with the game hanging in the balance, Jalen lined up out wide once again. Off the snap, he immediately recognized the zone coverage and raced toward the opening, throwing his hand up as he ripped up the seam. The quarterback hit him in stride, and Jalen walked into the end zone on a miraculous play. The stadium stadium erupted, cheers pouring down even harder than the rain. In Jalen's very first playoff game, Washington wrangled the Longhorns and proved to everyone they belonged here. After the win, the locker room was chaos, and somewhere in the celebration, Jalen picked up his phone and fired off a quick text to his brother. Marcus, meanwhile, was lacing up for his own playoff run. He'd been seeing the waves Jalen was making in Seattle, and for the first time in his life, Marcus saw his twin in a completely different way. Jalen wasn't just his brother anymore, and he wasn't just another member of the Knox family to pick up a football, he was a threat. Marcus didn't respond to the text. The playoffs brought out a different kind of animal in him, and now was no time for distractions. He was still the same terrifying force he'd been all year, but now there was a new level of focus behind it. Marcus had been here before, and for him, there were no nerves, only unfinished business. Alabama opened the day strong, and Marcus wasted no time making his presence felt. Blowing past the tackle, he buried the quarterback for a sack that by this point felt almost routine. The Tide jumped out to a lead, but Penn State wasn't going down quietly. Late in the third quarter, clinging to only a 3-point advantage, Marcus came through with one of the most awkward TFLs you'll ever see. But hey, we'll take it. Alabama looked strong, but with only 2 minutes left and the lead sitting at 6, letting up a touchdown could end their season. And Penn State was chunking their way down the field, looking like they might do exactly that. Marcus did everything he could to hold the line, building a wall on the defense. He shed a block for another tackle for loss, trying to stop the Lions in their tracks, and moments later he came flying across the field for what might have been a touchdown-saving tackle. But with 50 seconds left, Penn State stood at the goal line, knocking at the door. The Lions lofted a pass over Marcus's head, and it's picked off by Alabama. That is the ball game. Alabama survived the thriller, and Marcus Knox marched on, keeping his mission of redemption very much alive. It wasn't pretty, but at this stage in the season, victory rarely is. After the game, Jalen reached out again to congratulate him, and strangely, that text went unanswered too. Marcus stared down at the messages on his phone. He knew he should respond, but he also knew that maybe he shouldn't. The weeks following what had become the closest Heisman vote in history left the nation divided. One half believed Jalen was the obvious choice, and the other insisted Marcus had been robbed. Marcus tried to ignore the noise, but the truth was, losing college football's biggest award to Jalen stung. He couldn't stand seeing that trophy in someone else's hands, even if those hands were his brother's. And staying silent was the only way to keep himself from saying what he really felt, that the Heisman should have been his. Suddenly, Marcus's phone rang. It was Jalen. "Are you avoiding me or something?" Jalen asked. "You haven't said a word since the ceremony. I thought we put everything from this year behind us." Marcus didn't respond. "I can hear you breathing, genius." Marcus sighed. "Look, Jay, I'm sorry. I just think we should be focused on ourselves right now, our teams." "That doesn't mean you— This is the playoffs, Jalen," Marcus interrupted. "It's hard to get here, and it's even harder to keep going. That's where my mind is right now. It has to be." Jalen was taken aback by the directness. Yeah, I guess you're right. It's nothing personal. It's just football." For the first time in his life, Jalen hardly recognized his brother. Marcus's voice wasn't cold, just stern. He was one game away from returning to the national championship, the game that had haunted him all season long. Every Saturday, the loss replayed in his head, and he wasn't about to let anything stop him from finishing the job. Not this time. And standing in his way was Ohio State, a team Marcus knew all too well. And as it turned out, they knew him too. The Buckeyes double-teamed Marcus on nearly every snap, effectively erasing him from the game. But thankfully, Alabama's offense came ready to play, jumping out to an early lead. But nothing in the playoffs is ever easy. Ohio State struck once with a deep play, then again with a short run, and suddenly the Buckeyes were right back in it. Coming out of halftime, Coach got creative, moving Marcus around the defense, and when he did, Marcus came flying downhill for a massive tackle for loss. He lined up on the edge of the very next play, won inside, and dropped the quarterback for a sack. But even after two huge plays killed Ohio State's drive, Marcus stormed to the sideline furious. He didn't just want impact, he wanted domination. And on the next drive, he got it. Reading the play action perfectly, Marcus smothered the quarterback deep in the backfield. The nation's best defender was alive and well, and from that moment on, he lived behind the line of scrimmage, collapsing the pocket and forcing hurried throws all game long. Ohio State would score late, but by then, it was far too little and far too late. Marcus Knox and Alabama were headed back to the national championship. In the locker room, the team celebrated wildly, but Marcus didn't join in. Instead, he sat quietly by his locker, staring around the room. There was nothing to celebrate. He hadn't won anything yet. Alabama fighting their way back to the Natty felt inevitable, especially with Marcus playing the way he had all year. But on the other side of the country, the Heisman winner was trying to carry his team the distance too. Washington was deep into the playoffs, and things weren't going to slow down. In their quarterfinal matchup, Jalen was quickly learning just how different playoff football really was. Duke was playing faster and hitting harder than just about any team he'd faced all year. On their first drive, Washington faced a 3rd and long, and Jalen knew he needed to rise to the challenge. He took a screen pass, got 2 massive blocks from his linemen, and snaked his way through traffic for a huge first down to keep the chains moving. And soon after, the the Huskies got on the board with a play-action fake and a strike to the end zone. Duke responded right away, but Jalen wasn't fazed. He took another screen pass, this time surging forward for a 35-yard pickup that moved Washington across midfield. Jalen knew that going against an offense like the Blue Devils, every drive needed to end in points, and even though the defense was making him fight for every yard, it was only a matter of time before he punched in his first score of the game. And yeah, I guess you could say his playoff nerves had officially disappeared. And once they did, Heisman Jalen was unleashed all over the field. Duke couldn't contain him, and even though they came out of the half with a score to make things interesting, Jalen was determined to stomp out any hope of a comeback. He ripped off his longest run of the day and only being tracked down after moving Washington back into the red zone. Then, following some beautiful blocks one last time, Jalen punched in another Husky touchdown, and finally, Duke ran out of gas. Washington continued to pile it on, showing the nation their offense was as strong as ever heading into the semifinal. After the game, the locker room was going crazy, and right in the center of it all was Jalen. He'd been the driving force behind a Washington team that was now just one game shy of a national championship appearance. But over in Tuscaloosa, Marcus sat watching his own brother win game after game, round after round, looking more formidable every week. And as he tuned into Jalen's semifinal game, Marcus couldn't help but feel conflicted. Of course he wanted his brother to win, of course he wanted to see him succeed, but why did he really want it? Was it for Jalen, or so he could get his shot at embarrassing the Heisman winner on the biggest stage imaginable? Meanwhile, as Jalen took the field, he couldn't help but feel a little bit in awe. This was without a doubt the biggest game of his career, and to think it wasn't that long ago that he was planning what his life might look like without football. He was never supposed to be here, or maybe he was. One game away from a real shot at a national title, and one game away from landing his name among college football's greats. But he couldn't think that far ahead, not with Arkansas determined to punch their own ticket. The first time Jalen touched the field, Washington was already down 7, and early on the Razorbacks made him look like his high school self again. Every handoff went nowhere, every hit was followed by trash talk, the nation's #1 offense looked broken. In the second quarter, still trailing by 7, Washington desperately needed something to spark them. Jalen leaked out for a screen with a wide open field in front of him, and the ball bounced right off his hands. In that moment, the thought crept in. Maybe this was it. Maybe the lights were finally too bright. It had been a wild ride, but maybe this is where it all ends. The negative thoughts started piling up, but suddenly a ball hit Jalen square in the chest, snapping him right back into the moment, and off of pure instinct, he turned upfield, looked around, and realized there wasn't a Razorback within a mile of him. Jalen walked straight into the end zone for a Husky touchdown, and just like that, the doubt lifted off of his shoulders. They could do this. But one big play wasn't going to win the game. Arkansas clamped down, knowing full well that victory meant containing number 6. With less than a minute before halftime, coach looked ready to jog into the locker room and draw up some adjustments, but when there's a Knox in your backfield, any given carry can turn into a home run. Jalen followed his blocks to the second level, bounced it outside, and turned on the Jets for a 40-yard touchdown right before halftime. The momentum was finally shifting. Arkansas scored coming out of the break, but Jalen wasn't sweating it. Then suddenly, the Washington offense sputtered again. A quick 3-and-out led to another Razorback score, and now in the fourth quarter, down 7, Jalen knew that if they were going to pull this off, it had to come from him. One handoff later, he squeezed through traffic and pushed Washington deep into Arkansas territory, but inside the red zone, Arkansas became a wall, the toughest Jalen had faced all year. Washington faced a 3rd and forever with 2 minutes left, and Jalen knew this was it. Getting stopped here meant the end of everything. He motioned out of the backfield and into the slot, and right off the snap, he saw the Razorbacks fall into zone coverage and instantly knew what he needed to do. He burst upfield, threw his hand up, and walked straight into the end zone for the game-tying touchdown. This game wasn't over yet. One defensive stop later, and the semifinal was headed to overtime. Arkansas got the ball first and settled for 3, and as Jalen ran onto the field, the path to the national championship was suddenly wide open in front of him. One touchdown, that's all it would take. A quick screen set Washington up in prime position, then on 3rd down from the 5, Jalen leaked out of the backfield and no one covered him. The ball hit his hands in the end zone, and Washington had done it. For the first time ever, Jalen Knox was national championship bound. The stadium exploded and the team was going crazy. Jalen never wanted to leave that field. After the game, a reporter waiting outside his locker room asked him if this performance might help his Heisman odds. Who's gonna tell him? As the Huskies continued celebrating, Jalen's excitement slowly turned into something else. That sinking feeling, that weight in his stomach. He knew what was waiting for him. The one team, the one player he feared lining up against. And right then, Jalen's phone buzzed. It was Marcus. See you next week. Of all the ways senior year could end, no one could have imagined this. 4 long, brutal seasons of growth, resentment, heartbreak, and headlines had all led to one final game. Alabama versus Washington, brother versus brother, twin versus twin for the national championship. The night before kickoff, Jalen and Marcus both sat alone in their rooms, phone within reach. Each of them thought about reaching out, maybe sending a quick text, cracking a joke like they used to, just to cut through some of the tension for a moment. But neither of them did. As the night dragged on, neither phone rang. Morning came faster than either of them expected, and the day had finally arrived. When the teams arrived at the stadium, the energy was already building. The parking lots were packed, the crowds were roaring, and inside, the entire place felt like it was shaking. Deep inside the stadium, the twins made their way toward the field, and in the tunnel, they crossed paths. No crowds, no cameras, just the echoes of cleats on concrete. Marcus stepped forward first. "I never thought it would come to this." Jalen let out a quiet breath. "Yeah, but here we are." For a split second, Marcus's game face cracked, but it came back just as quickly. I'll see you out there." No handshake, no hug, the twins walked past each other without another word, only war in their eyes. Up in the stands, the entire Knox family sat together, watching the twins take the field one last time. Washington starts with the ball, and the quarterback was feeling pressure immediately. He dumps it off over the middle to Jalen, who was met by Marcus just short of the first down. The Huskies turn it over, and Alabama responds by putting up 3, and the next time Jalen touches the field, he takes a handoff to the edge and surges forward for a 29-yard pickup. As the crowd roars, Marcus watches his brother, realizing just how far he'd come since their last meeting. Jalen looks stronger, quicker, and more determined than ever. There was no room for holding back today. Jalen keeps ripping off chunk gains one after another, driving the Huskies down to the goal line where he reels one in for a touchdown right under Marcus's nose. The nation's top offense takes the lead, and early on, the Heisman winner seems to have the upper hand. Alabama responds with a touchdown of their own, and on the next drive, Marcus was shoving linemen aside just to get within striking distance of his brother. Washington coaches knew they had to scheme away from number 44, but even when they did, Marcus flew across the formation to stop Jalen short. For the first time in their lives, the two twins looked like equals, exchanging blows, each one carrying the weight of years. Washington faced a 4th and 1 at midfield and decided to roll the dice, but Jalen is swallowed in the backfield for a turnover on downs. Alabama wastes no time, giving the ball to their own back, who rumbles in for a touchdown to give the Tide a 10-point lead. But despite the deficit, Washington kept feeding the run game. Jalen hit the edge, made Bama defenders look silly before Marcus flies across the field to finally bring him down. Marcus was feeling in control of this one, and on the next play, Washington dials up a screen pass, the play he had been waiting for. He shot down the line, ready for that familiar stiff arm, but as Jalen races up the field, he pulls out a move Marcus hasn't seen before, spinning him out of his cleats. The stadium erupts, and Heisman chants were pouring down from the stands. With the momentum shifting, Jalen caught a pass over the middle and spun away from another Bama defender, fighting up to the 2 before Marcus flies in, driving him to the turf from behind. And as they get up, the twins lock eyes, Jalen smirking slightly and Marcus's eyes burning red. From there, Jalen punches in his second touchdown of the night, and it was now the game started to get chippy. Every collision just went a little further. Marcus was seeing red everywhere, and the toll of the battle was clear on both of them. Washington tries to air it out to Jalen, but Marcus is there with perfect one-on-one coverage, leaping into the air to swat it away. Both twins were giving everything out there, and everyone on the field knew these two were battling for more than just a national title. Still down by 3, Washington was looking for points before the half. Jalen fought hard, trying to will his team into scoring position. The quarterback lofts it up, but Marcus was there waiting like a shark. He picked it off and put Alabama right back in control. Bama tacks on a field goal, extending their lead at halftime, and heading into the break, both twins looked supernatural, and as impressive as Jalen has been, it was Marcus and Alabama who seemed to have the edge. Coming out of the half, Jalen was running with more anger than ever. Marcus was in prime position to stop him once again, but Jalen wasn't having it. By sheer force of will, he was dragging Washington down the field. Catch after catch, and over the middle, he throws up a stiff arm, but Marcus bats it down and drags him to the ground. The Huskies were marching, and once they approached the goal line, Marcus was erased from the play, letting Jalen walk into the end zone for the score. Washington takes a razor-thin 1-point lead, but it wouldn't last. Alabama answered right back in the 4th quarter, reclaiming the lead. And at this point, Marcus looked unstoppable. Anything Jalen tried, he was there to shut it down. Bama would extend their lead to 8, and Washington was searching for life late. They lean on their Heisman back, who takes a handoff to the edge, hard cuts back inside, and follows beautiful blocks, racing up the sideline before being chased down at the 2-yard line. A big play like that gives the Huskies the boost they need to finish the drive with another dump off to Jalen for another score. Then Washington elects to go for 2, and absolutely no one is on Jalen as he high steps into the end zone. We have a tie game. Alabama's offense comes up empty for what feels like the first time all day, and with 2 minutes left, Washington had a real shot at the win. But here comes Marcus, crushing Jalen behind the line and following it up with a huge sack, forcing Washington to punt it away. And with just 40 seconds left on the clock, Bama marches down and takes the lead. Down 7, the clock ticking away, Washington needed a miracle. But Jalen didn't blink. With the weight of the world on his back, he weaved his way through traffic on a huge play to move the offense down inside the 10-yard line. As the seconds continued to fall off the clock, the Huskies lined back up. This was it. for the game. They put the ball in the Heisman's hands, and as Jalen takes the toss, he knew this was it, the last play of his college career. And right there, the years flashed before his eyes, from riding the bench to getting a shot and never looking back. And now, just yards away from finishing it. Marcus reads the pitch and charges forward. Knowing the end was near, he pictured his journey. The wins, the losses, the struggles, the times he and Jalen grew apart and back together, everything had led to this moment. It's a race to the goal line. As time expires, Marcus meets Jalen, wrapping him up at the 1-yard line. Alabama wins. The final whistle echoes through the stadium as the crowd erupted. Crimson confetti began to fall from the rafters as both twins remain on the ground, staring up at the lights above them. Jalen couldn't move. He was stunned. He had just played the game of his life, leaving everything he had on this field, and still, somehow, it wasn't enough. Marcus sees his brother lying there. Instead of celebrating, instead of running toward the sideline with the rest of his team, he picked his brother up. Jay, you played a hell of a game. It could have gone either way, truly. The two brothers embrace with tears of victory and tears of defeat spilling down their faces. And just like that, the rivalry that had defined the last 4 years was over. Still holding Jalen close, Marcus leans in and says, "You'll always be the Heisman," something he himself could never claim. Jalen lets out a small chuckle. He pats Marcus on the back and tells him to go celebrate with his team. Marcus nods, gives one last smile, and jogs away, disappearing into the sea of crimson jerseys waiting for him. Jalen stayed behind a moment longer, looking around the stadium one final time. The lights, the fans, the game he loved. He may not have walked away with the championship, but something about standing on this field and making it this far was all the validation he'd ever need. Jalen picked up his helmet and began the long walk back toward the locker room. The Knox twins had just gone to war on the biggest stage in college football. Marcus Knox finally captured the redemption he'd been chasing all season long, and Jalen proved he was every bit the fighter the nation believed he was. But the truth is, neither brother gets here without the other. 4 seasons of battles, 4 seasons of pushing each other further than either thought possible, and when it was all said and done, the final clash didn't just decide a national champion, it cemented one of the greatest brother rivalries the sport had ever seen. Marcus Knox leaves college football with the championship he fought so hard to reclaim, and Jalen Knox walks away as the Heisman winner who carried Washington to the brink of glory. 2 different endings, 2 incredible careers, one unforgettable story. The story of the Knox twins. Thanks for watching.